My son-in-law snatched my passport from my hand right in the middle of the crowded terminal and looked me dead in the eye. "You are not going to Texas." He spat out, his voice dripping with a venom that silenced the travelers around us. "You are staying home to take care of the dogs." Before I could even blink, he tore my boarding pass in half, then into quarters, and let the confetti of my dignity fall to the dirty airport floor. I stood there, a 69-year-old man who had built railroads with his bare hands, and I said nothing. I simply watched him walk away with my daughter, thinking he had won. I turned around, walked to the customer service counter, and pulled out a card he didn't know existed. 10 minutes later, I canceled the first-class flights, the penthouse suite, and the luxury rental car I had paid for. I sat down with a black coffee and waited for his phone to ring. Before I tell you how I brought his world crashing down, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who paid for the ground they walk on. I am Walter Jefferson, though most people back at the rail yard just called me Pops. I spent 40 years laying steel tracks across Georgia, sweating under a sun that felt like it wanted to kill you, just so my family would never have to know that kind of struggle. I retired with a bad back, rough hands, and a bank account that I kept very private. My daughter Jasmine was my heart, the living image of her late mother, but she had a weakness. That weakness was standing 5 feet ahead of me in the check-in line at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, tapping his foot impatiently in designer loafers I knew he couldn't afford. Blake, my son-in-law. A 35-year-old man who called himself an entrepreneur but had never worked a hard day in his life. He was a tall, smooth-talking white man who thought the world owed him a living just because he showed up. We were on our way to Houston for a family wedding, a trip I was fully funding because Blake claimed his assets were tied up in his latest business venture, breeding French bulldogs. The airport was a zoo that morning. The air conditioning was struggling against the Atlanta heat, and the noise was deafening, a mix of rolling suitcases, crying babies, and the constant drone of announcements. I was moving a little slower than usual. My arthritis was flaring up, a reminder of the decades I spent swinging a sledgehammer. "Move it," Walter, Blake snapped, not even turning his head to look at me. "We are going to miss the bag drop because you are shuffling along like a zombie. Keep up or get left behind." I tightened my grip on the handle of my old leather suitcase. It was a quality bag bought 20 years ago, unlike the flashy, flimsy designer luggage Blake was dragging. Jasmine looked back at me, her eyes filled with that familiar apology, a silent plea for me not to cause a scene. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was carrying Blake's laptop bag along with her own purse. She was his assistant, his maid, and his bankroll all wrapped up in the title of wife. "I am moving as fast as I can, Blake," I said, my voice low and steady. "We have 3 hours before the flight. There is no fire." He stopped abruptly, causing a woman behind me to nearly crash into my back. He spun around, his face flushed with that artificial stress he always carried. He loved to act like the busiest man in the room. He looked at me with pure disdain, scanning my comfortable slacks and the simple polo shirt I wore. To him, I was just an old, invisible black man who was lucky to be in his presence. "You just don't get it, do you?" he hissed, stepping into my personal space. "This isn't just a wedding for me. I have potential investors meeting us in Houston. I need to be in the right headspace. I need focus. And having you wheezing down my neck is killing my vibe." I looked at Jasmine, waiting for her to step in, waiting for her to say, "Blake, don't talk to my father like that." But she just looked at the floor, studying the scuff marks on the tiles. That hurt more than his words. Silence is a heavy thing to carry when it comes from your own blood. We finally reached the security checkpoint entrance. The line was winding back towards the entrance doors. Blake let out a dramatic groan, throwing his hands up in the air. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. He looked at the long line, then he looked at me, and I saw a gear turn in his head. A cruel, calculated idea forming behind his eyes. He turned to me, his expression shifting from annoyance to a cold, hard resolve. "Give me your passport and ticket, Walter," he demanded, holding out his hand. I frowned, confused. "Why?" "We need to show them to the agent right there. Just give them to me," he snapped, snapping his fingers. I handed them over, thinking he was going to organize them for the group. Instead, he pulled my boarding pass out from the passport book. He looked at it, then looked at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. You know what he said, his voice loud enough that people in the line started to watch? "This isn't going to work." What isn't going to work? I asked, feeling a cold prickle of dread on the back of my neck. You coming with us? He said casually, as if discussing the weather. I have been thinking about it. The dogs. I don't trust the pet sitter. Those dogs are my inventory, Walter. They are worth $10,000 a puppy. I can't leave them with some neighborhood kid. I stared at him. You want me to miss my niece's wedding to watch your dogs? Not ask, Walter. Tell. You are staying. And then he did it. With a swift, violent motion, he tore my boarding pass right down the middle. The sound of the thick paper ripping seemed to echo over the noise of the terminal. He didn't stop there. He put the halves together and tore them again and again until my ticket to Houston was nothing but confetti in his manicured hand. He opened his palm and let the pieces flutter down to the dirty linoleum floor. Jasmine let out a small gasp. Blake, she whispered, her voice trembling. You can't do that. He paid for the tickets. He ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on mine. He smiled a cruel, tight-lipped smile. He paid, but I am in charge. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of peppermint and arrogance. Look at you, Walter. You barely made it from the curb to here. You would be a burden in Texas. You would just sit in the corner of the reception looking old and tired. Do something useful for once. Go home. Clean the kennels. Make sure the studs get their supplements. That is about your speed, isn't it? Shoveling shit. The insult hung in the air. He was reducing 40 years of labor, 40 years of raising a family, 40 years of being a man down to cleaning up after his dogs. People were staring. A security guard took a step forward, watching us. Jasmine was shaking, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't move towards me. She stayed by his side. I looked at the torn paper on the floor. I looked at my daughter, who was too broken to defend the man who raised her. And then I looked at Blake. I felt a fire ignite in my chest, a hot, white rage that I hadn't felt since my days on the Union line. But I pushed it down. I pushed it deep down into the cold, dark place where I kept my business decisions. I didn't yell. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing the angry black man he wanted me to be. I simply nodded. Once. Okay, I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. Blake blinked, surprised by my surrender. He expected a fight. He wanted a fight so he could play the victim. When I didn't give it to him, he let out a scoff of triumph. Good, he said, turning his back on me. Give me your house keys, Jasmine. He needs to get back to the dogs. Jasmine fumbled in her purse and handed me her spare key, avoiding my eyes. I took it. I took my passport back from Blake's hand. Have a safe flight, I said. Blake didn't answer. He grabbed Jasmine's arm and steered her towards the TSA checkpoint, marching forward like a general who had just won a war. I stood there for a moment, watching them go. I watched my daughter disappear into the crowd, dragging the weight of his ego along with her luggage. I waited until they were through the first ID check, until there was no turning back for them. Then I picked up my suitcase. I didn't walk towards the exit. I walked towards the Delta Airlines help desk. The line was short. The agent was a kind-looking woman with graying hair and tired eyes. She looked up and gave me a polite smile. Can I help you, sir? Yes, ma'am, I said, reaching into my wallet. I pulled out a card. It wasn't the debit card Blake thought I lived on. It was heavy, made of anodized titanium. The American Express Centurion card, the black card, invitation only. I had earned this card through decades of smart investments in real estate and stocks that I never bragged about at the dinner table. Blake thought I lived on a pension. He had no idea I owned the land his favorite golf course was built on. The agent's eyes widened slightly when she saw the card. Her posture straightened. How can I assist you, Mr. Jefferson? I have 3 tickets booked on the flight to Houston departing in 2 hours, I said, my voice steady and professional. I need to make some changes. Certainly. Are you canceling your seat? No, I said, taking a sip of the air that suddenly felt much cooler and fresher. I am canceling the entire itinerary. The tickets were purchased under my account. Passenger names Blake Harrison and Jasmine Harrison. She typed rapidly on her keyboard. I see them here. First-class flexible fares. You want to cancel both of them. Cancel them, I confirmed. And ma'am, I also booked a rental car through your partner service, a luxury SUV, and 2 executive suites at the Four Seasons in Houston, all under this card. I see those as well. Wipe them all out, I said. Full cancellation. She looked at me for a second, sensing the story behind the request, but she was a professional. She nodded. Done. The total refund of $4,500 has been processed back to your card. The tickets are now void. The hotel and car reservations are deleted. Is there anything else? Yes, I said. Is there a seat available on the next flight to Texas? Maybe tomorrow morning. She checked. I have one seat in first class on the 6 a.m. flight tomorrow. Book it, I said. But put it under my name only. I have some business to attend to in Houston. Alone. Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. You are all set. I walked away from the counter and found a seat near the large glass windows overlooking the tarmac. I watched the planes taking off, big steel birds defying gravity. I went to a kiosk and bought a large black coffee. I sat down, crossed my legs, and checked my phone. A notification popped up. American Express refund processed. $4,500. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee. It tasted bitter and rich. I looked at my watch. They would be at the gate by now. They would be trying to board. The gate agent would scan their boarding passes. The machine would beep. A red light would flash. I imagined Blake's face. I imagined the arrogance draining out of him, replaced by panic. He had no money. His cards were maxed out. He was stranded in the terminal with a wife he didn't respect and an ego he couldn't afford. My phone started to vibrate in my hand. The screen lit up. It was a picture of Jasmine and Blake. The caller ID said son-in-law. I let it ring. I watched the phone dance across the little table. I took another sip of coffee. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again immediately, and again. I smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. I wasn't going home to take care of the dogs. The dogs were about to be the least of his problems. I was just getting started. The yellow taxi smelled of pine air freshener and old leather, a scent that was infinitely better than the recycled air of the airport terminal. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, letting the vibration of the car on the highway settle into my bones. For the first time in 5 years since my wife passed and I let my daughter and her husband move in, I felt a sense of peace. It was quiet. There was no blaring television, no Blake bragging about a deal that didn't exist, and no Jasmine tiptoeing around trying to keep the peace. The driver, a Somali man who had nodded respectfully when he loaded my heavy suitcase, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "You okay, boss?" he asked with a thick accent. I looked at him and gave a small, tired smile. "Better than I have been in a long time, son. Just drive." I wanted to enjoy the silence, but the phone in my pocket had other plans. It started vibrating against my thigh like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with the name son-in-law. I didn't answer it. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Then a text message popped up. "Pick up the phone, Walter." I watched the words appear and disappear. I waited until we were merging onto the I-85 North, putting miles of concrete between me and them before I finally slid my thumb across the screen. I didn't put it to my ear. I pressed the speakerphone button and held it flat in my palm like I was holding a piece of evidence. "You senile old man." Blake's voice exploded into the quiet cab so loud the taxi driver flinched. "What did you do? What did you do to the cards?" I stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, watching the sun reflect off the glass buildings. I didn't say a word. I just breathed steadily, listening to the panic in his voice. "Are you listening to me?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "We are at the counter. I tried to rebook us on the next flight. I handed them the gold card. Declined. I handed them the platinum. Declined. The agent cut the card right in front of me, Walter. She cut it with scissors. Do you know how humiliating that is? People are watching." I took a slow breath. I imagined the scene. Blake sweating in his linen suit, his face turning that blotchy shade of red he got when things didn't go his way. He always loved to flash those cards. He loved the sound they made when he slapped them on a counter. Now they were just plastic scrap. "I tried to use my debit card," Blake continued, his voice dropping to a desperate growl. "And you know what it said? Insufficient funds. You emptied the joint account." "That was my money, Walter. That was for the business. Your business," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was low, calm, and heavy as a sledgehammer. "You mean the money I deposit every month to keep the lights on? That isn't your money, Blake. It never was. It was an allowance, and you just got cut off." I heard a scuffle on the other end of the line. Then I heard my daughter's voice. She was crying. "Daddy, please," Jasmine sobbed. "Everyone is staring at us. Blake is causing a scene. Security is walking over here. Please just turn the cards back on. We can't stay here. Our bags are already gone. We have nowhere to go." Hearing Jasmine cry used to be my weakness. It used to be the thing that made me open my wallet and fix everything. But this time I remembered the look on her face when Blake tore my ticket. I remembered her silence. She had chosen her side. She stood by the man who humiliated her father. Now she had to stand by him while he humiliated himself. "You have feet, Jasmine," I said coldly, "and I assume Blake has a little cash in those fancy Italian loafers. Take an Uber, or walk. I am going to sue you." Blake roared, wrestling the phone back from her. "You can't do this. I have investors meeting me in Houston. This is financial abuse. When I get home, I am going to—" "Sir." I heard a new voice on the line, stern and authoritative. It was airport security. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and step away from the counter. You are disturbing other passengers." "Get your hands off me," Blake yelled, but his voice was distant now. "Do you know who I am? My father-in-law owns—" I hung up. The silence rushed back into the taxi sweeter than before. The driver looked at me in the mirror again, his eyes wide. I just pointed forward. "Keep driving," I said. "I have some dogs to feed." When the taxi pulled up to my driveway, the house looked majestic. It was a 2-story brick colonial that I had bought 30 years ago, paid off with sweat and overtime shifts. The lawn was manicured, the hedges trimmed. From the outside, it looked like the perfect American dream. But I knew the rot was on the inside. I paid the driver in cash and added a $50 tip. He thanked me profusely and drove off. I stood alone in my driveway with my suitcase. I didn't go to the front door immediately. I took my phone out and opened the Smart Home app. I had installed these locks a year ago because Blake kept losing his keys. I scrolled down to the user list. Admin Walter, user Jasmine, user Blake. I tapped on Blake's name. Delete user, confirm. I tapped on Jasmine's name. Delete user, confirm. Then I changed the master code. For years the code had been Jasmine's birthday. Not anymore. I punched in the date I started my first job at the rail yard, a date that meant something about hard work and survival. The lock beeped and flashed green. The fortress was secured. I rolled my suitcase up the driveway, but I didn't go inside the main house. I walked around the side past the pristine rose bushes I used to tend with my wife towards the detached garage. This was Blake's domain, his office, his headquarters for the breeding empire he talked about so much. As soon as I got within 10 feet of the garage door, the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of a professional kennel. It was the sharp, stinging scent of ammonia and stale feces. I felt a knot of anger tighten in my stomach. I punched the code into the garage keypad and the heavy door rolled up slowly. The heat rushed out like a physical blow. It was at least 90 degrees inside. The air conditioning unit in the window was off, probably to save money on the electric bill that I paid. In the dim light, I saw them. 5 stackable wire cages lined up against the back wall. Inside were 5 French Bulldogs dogs that Blake claimed were worth thousands of dollars each. They didn't look like $10,000 dogs. They looked miserable. The cages were too small. The metal trays underneath were overflowing with waste that hadn't been cleaned in days. Their water bowls were bone dry. The dogs were panting heavily, their flat faces pressed against the wire mesh, eyes wide with distress. These weren't pets to Blake. They were inventory. They were products. He had told me to stay home and take care of them, but clearly he hadn't taken care of them himself for a long time. "Hey there, little ones," I whispered, dropping my suitcase. I walked over to the first cage. A little pied bulldog whimpered and licked my fingers through the wire. My heart broke. This was the cruelty of a man who only cared about appearances. He wore expensive suits while his animals sat in their own filth. I unlocked the cages one by one. The doors swung open. The dogs hesitated for a second, unsure if they were allowed to move. "Go on," I said gently. "Get out of here." They scrambled out their claws, clicking on the concrete floor. I opened the side door that led to the fenced backyard. The fresh air and the smell of grass called to them. They bolted into the yard, running in clumsy, happy circles, relieving themselves on the lawn, rolling in the cool dirt. I grabbed the hose from the wall and filled a large plastic bucket with fresh, cool water. I carried it out to the patio. The dogs swarmed the bucket, lapping up the water like they had been crossing a desert. I watched them drink, their little bodies shaking with relief. I looked back at the garage. It was a dungeon. I saw bags of cheap dog food ripped open and spilling on the floor, not the premium brand Blake billed me for. I saw a whip hanging on the wall. I saw the truth of my son-in-law. He had torn up my ticket because he wanted a servant. He wanted someone to clean up this mess so he could keep playing the big shot in Texas. He wanted me to be complicit in his neglect. I walked back into the garage and grabbed the handle of the interior door that led to the kitchen. I turned the deadbolt, locking it from the garage side. Then I went out to the yard watching the dogs play. My phone buzzed again. A notification from the security camera app, motion detected at front door. I pulled up the feed. I saw a dark Uber pull up to the curb. Blake and Jasmine got out. They looked like wrecks. Blake's suit was rumpled, his tie missing. Jasmine's mascara was running down her face. They marched up to the front door. Blake reached for the handle and punched in the code. Nothing happened. He punched it in again, harder this time. Beep, beep, beep. Red light. I watched on the small screen as he slammed his fist against the door. I watched his mouth move, forming curses. I stood in the backyard surrounded by 5 happy dogs, and for the first time that day, I smiled. A real smile. "You wanted me to stay home, Blake?" I said to the empty air. "Well, I am home, and you are just a guest who overstayed his welcome." It was 2 a.m. when the headlights swept across the living room ceiling. I was sitting in my armchair in the dark, a glass of water in my hand, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the settling of the house. I had not slept. Sleep is a luxury for men who are at peace, and tonight I was at war. I watched through the sheer curtains as a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a luxury car service. It was a beat-up Uber, the kind with a rattling muffler that disturbed the quiet dignity of my neighborhood. I saw the interior light flicker on. I saw Blake in the back seat, gesturing wildly. Even from 50 feet away, I could tell he was arguing. I saw the driver turn around, shaking his head. I knew exactly what was happening. The ride was over and the app had tried to charge the card on file, the card I had locked. Blake was discovering that his charm didn't work on working-class men who just wanted to get paid and go home. After a few tense minutes, I saw Jasmine open her door. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a crumpled bill. It must have been emergency cash she kept tucked away. She handed it to the driver, who snatched it and practically kicked them out of the car. They stood on the sidewalk as the car screeched away, leaving them in a cloud of exhaust and humiliation. They had no luggage, just the clothes on their backs and the bitter taste of defeat. I watched them walk up the driveway. Blake was stomping his expensive loafers, clicking aggressively on the concrete. Jasmine trailed behind him, her shoulders slumped. She looked like a ghost of the vibrant girl I had raised. They reached the front porch. I heard the familiar beep of the electronic lock. Beep, 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 beep. Then the long, low tone of rejection. I heard Blake sigh a loud, theatrical exhale of frustration. He punched the numbers again, harder this time. I could hear his knuckles hitting the keypad. Beep, 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 beep. Error! Open the door! Walter, Blake yelled. His voice was muffled by the heavy oak door, but the anger cut right through. I know you are in there. I know you changed the code. Open this damn door right now. I didn't move. I took a sip of water. I checked my phone. The security camera feed showed Blake's face pressed against the glass sidelight, distorted and red with rage. He looked like a child who had been told no for the first time in his life. "Daddy, please," Jasmine called out. Her voice was thin and breaking. "It is late. We are tired. Please let us in." I stood up slowly. My knees popped, a reminder of the years I spent laying track so they could have this roof over their heads. I walked to the door, but I didn't unlock it. I flipped the switch for the porch light. The sudden brightness blinded them for a second. Blake shielded his eyes, then glared at the door handle. "This is illegal," Blake screamed. He pounded on the wood with his fist. Thud, thud, thud. "You can't lock me out of my own house. I have rights. I have residency. If you don't open this door in 3 seconds, I am going to kick it down." 1, 2. He drew his leg back. He was actually going to try it. He was going to kick down the door of the man who paid for his dinner, his clothes, and the roof he was standing under. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the smart home app again. I scrolled past the locks and the cameras until I found the irrigation control. I had installed a heavy-duty sprinkler system years ago to keep the lawn green during the scorching Georgia summers. The zones were powerful. And Zone 1 covered the flower beds right next to the front porch. Blake's foot was in the air when I tapped the button marked Manual Run. There was a hiss like a snake waking up, followed instantly by the thwack of the sprinkler heads popping up. Streams of high-pressure water blasted out, oscillating wildly. It wasn't a mist. It was a deluge. Blake screamed, but not in anger this time. It was a high-pitched yelp of shock. The water hit him square in the chest, soaking his linen suit instantly. He slipped on the wet concrete, his arms flailing as he tried to regain his balance. He grabbed onto the porch railing to keep from falling into the rose bushes. Jasmine shrieked and pressed herself against the brick wall, trying to escape the spray, but the water was relentless. It soaked her hair, her dress, her shoes. "What is wrong with you?" Blake sputtered, wiping water from his eyes. "Turn it off. You crazy old man, turn it off." I watched them dance in the artificial rain for a full minute. I watched the water wash away the arrogance. I watched the expensive fabric of Blake's suit cling to his body, revealing how small he really was underneath all that bravado. The water cooled the humid air, and I saw Blake start to shiver. It was 80 degrees in Atlanta during the day, but at 2 a.m., soaked to the bone, the chill set in fast. I tapped the button on my phone again. The hissing stopped. The sprinklers retracted into the ground with a satisfying click. The only sound left was the dripping of water from the porch roof and Blake's heavy, wet breathing. I unlocked the deadbolt. Click. I opened the door just 3 inches, keeping the heavy security chain fastened tight. I looked out at them through the crack. They looked like drowned rats. Blake's hair was plastered to his forehead. Jasmine was shivering, holding her arms around herself. Daddy Jasmine whimpered. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, mixing with the sprinkler water. "Why? Why would you do that? You threatened to kick down my door," I said calmly. My voice was steady, contrasting with their chaos. "I was protecting my property. Let us in," Blake demanded, though his voice lacked its usual fire. He sounded exhausted. "I am going to get pneumonia. Let us in right now." I looked at Jasmine. I saw my wife in her eyes. I saw the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I hated seeing her like this, but I knew that comfort was what got us into this mess. Comfort was the poison. "Jasmine," I said softly, "you can come in." She exhaled, stepping forward. "Thank you, Daddy." But I continued, holding up a hand. "You sleep on the couch. Not in the master bedroom. Not in your old room. The couch. And tomorrow morning you get up and you start looking for a job." She froze. "A job. But Blake and I are focusing on the business." "There is no business, Jasmine," I said. "We will talk about that tomorrow. Couch or the street. Choose." She looked at Blake. He nodded frantically, his teeth chattering. "Just go in, Jazz. Open the door for me once you are inside." I shifted my gaze to Blake. The chain rattled as I leaned closer to the crack. "You are not coming inside, Blake." What Blake's eyes went wide. "You can't separate us. We are married. Where she goes, I go." "Not tonight," I said. "You wanted to stay home to take care of the dogs, didn't you? That was the reason you tore up my ticket. That was the reason you humiliated me. You were so worried about your precious inventory." I stepped back slightly, preparing to close the door. "The dogs are in the garage, Blake. I let them out of those cages you kept them in. They have the run of the place now. But I locked the door from the house to the garage." "You expect me to sleep in the garage?" Blake shouted, incredulous. "It smells like shit in there. There is no air conditioning. It is a concrete box. It is a roof," I said. "And it is where you kept those animals for months. If it is good enough for the creatures that were supposed to make you rich, it is good enough for you." "Daddy, please," Jasmine pleaded. "He can't sleep in the garage. He has a choice," I said. "The garage or the sidewalk. But if he tries to break into this house, I will call the police and report an intruder. And seeing as I am the homeowner and he is threatening me, they won't be asking him politely to leave." I looked Blake in the eye one last time. "You love those dogs so much, Blake. Sleep with them." I slammed the door shut. I locked the deadbolt. I listened. I heard Jasmine crying, asking me to open up. I waited. After a minute, I heard the beep of the lock again, but this time it was me unlocking it just enough to let Jasmine slip through. As soon as she was across the threshold, soaking wet and trembling, I slammed it shut again and threw the deadbolt before Blake could grab the handle. Jasmine stood in the foyer, dripping water onto the hardwood floors. She looked at me with betrayal in her eyes. I didn't apologize. I went to the linen closet and threw her a towel. "Living room," I said, pointing to the couch. She didn't argue. She knew I meant it. She wrapped the towel around her shoulders and walked silently into the living room. I went to the kitchen window that looked out over the driveway. I saw Blake standing there for a long time. He looked at the front door. He looked at the street. He pulled out his phone, probably to call a hotel, but then he remembered. No credit card, no cash, no friends who would pick him up at 2 a.m. without payment. He let out a scream of frustration, kicking the tire of his truck that sat in the driveway, a truck he couldn't drive because he had no gas money. Finally defeated, he turned and walked towards the garage. I watched him punch in the code. The door rolled up. He hesitated at the smell, covering his nose with his arm. But he walked in. The door rolled down behind him. I walked to the hallway and checked the internal door that connected the kitchen to the garage. It was locked tight. I dragged a heavy oak chair from the dining room and wedged it under the doorknob just in case he got any ideas. I turned off the lights downstairs. I could hear Jasmine weeping softly on the couch. It was a sad sound, but it was a necessary one. Tears are just the body processing pain, and she had a lot of pain she had been ignoring for 5 years. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. My arthritis was throbbing from the tension, but my mind was clear. I lay down in my bed, listening to the silence of the house. Outside in the garage, my son-in-law was sleeping on a concrete floor, surrounded by the reality he had created. Inside, my daughter was learning that actions have consequences. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow the sun would rise, and with it the real work would begin. I had cut off the money. I had locked the doors. Now I had to expose the lies. I drifted off to sleep, thinking about the stack of invoices sitting on my desk, ready for the morning light. The smell of frying bacon used to be the signal for a family gathering in my house, but this morning it was the smell of judgment. I stood over the cast iron skillet, flipping thick strips of pork just the way I liked them, crisp and greasy. The sun was streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows across the oak dining table. That table was bare except for a single plate of food for me and a stack of paper that was thick enough to choke a horse. Jasmine was sitting on the living room couch, wrapped in the blanket I had given her the night before. She looked small. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and her expensive dress was wrinkled and stained with the sprinkler water. She looked up when she smelled the food, and I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She thought maybe Daddy was back. She thought maybe I was cooking for everyone and we would sit down and laugh about the misunderstanding at the airport. She was wrong. I turned off the stove and plated my breakfast. Then I picked up the stack of papers. I walked over to the dining table and dropped them. The thud they made against the wood echoed through the silent house like a judge's gavel. "Come here, Jasmine," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it left no room for argument. She stood up slowly and walked over to the table. She looked at the papers and then at me. "What is this, Daddy?" she asked, rubbing her arms. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the chair opposite me. She sat. I took a bite of bacon, chewed it slowly, and then reached for the first piece of paper. "This is the electric bill," I said, sliding it across the polished wood. $580. That is for last month alone. Do you know why it is so high? Because Blake runs 3 industrial fans and a heater in the garage 24 hours a day for his dogs. I slid the next paper. The water bill. $300. He hoses down that garage twice a day because he refuses to actually scrub the floor. I kept them coming. The internet bill for the highest speed package because Blake needs to stream his video games while he pretends to work. The grocery bill, which was mostly steaks and organic produce that I never got to eat. And then the big one. I slammed a glossy statement down. The auto loan. $750 a month for a Ford F-150 Raptor. A truck he has never put a single piece of lumber in. A truck he drives to the mall and parks across 2 spaces. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at the numbers, her mouth slightly open. $4,500, Jasmine. That is the monthly cost of keeping your husband feeling like a man. That is what I pay every single month to support a grown man who calls me lazy. He is trying. Daddy, she whispered, her voice trembling. He is an entrepreneur. Startups take time. He is building a brand with the dogs. I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. A brand. Jasmine, he isn't building anything. He is digging a hole and I am the one holding the shovel. I reached into the bottom of the stack and pulled out the credit card statements. These were the ones from the supplementary card I had given her for household emergencies. The card Blake had been using. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a line item highlighted in yellow. "Last Tuesday, the Velvet Lounge, $180. Jasmine frowned. Maybe he had a business meeting. To sell a puppy. I shook my head slowly. At the Velvet Lounge. That is a steakhouse, Jasmine. And look at the timestamp, 8:30 in the evening. Where were you last Tuesday at 8:30? She paused, thinking. I was at my yoga class. Then I came home and went to bed early because I had a headache. Exactly, I said. You were here. Blake told you he was checking on a supplier, right? She nodded, tears welling up again. I slid another receipt across the table. It was a detailed, itemized bill I had requested from the restaurant. I knew the manager there. He owed me a favor from back in the day. Look at the order, Jasmine. 2 ribeyes, 1 bottle of Pinot Noir, and a slice of cheesecake with 2 forks. I leaned forward. You are allergic to red wine, Jasmine, and you hate cheesecake. The silence that followed was heavier than the stack of bills. Jasmine stared at the paper. Her hands started to shake. She wasn't looking at a receipt anymore. She was looking at 5 years of lies. She was looking at the reality that her husband wasn't just a leech, he was a traitor. He hadn't just used my money to buy dogs. He had used my money to wine and dine another woman while his wife sat at home. It is a mistake, she whispered, but she didn't believe it. I could see the heartbreak cracking her face open. It is not a mistake, baby girl, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. It is a pattern. He doesn't respect you. He doesn't respect me. He respects the wallet, and the wallet is closed. Before she could answer, before the reality could fully sink in, we heard the sound, the distinct click of the back door latch sliding open. I froze. I had locked that door. I looked at Jasmine. She looked down at her lap, guilty. I unlocked it when I went to the bathroom, she confessed in a whisper. I thought he needed to use the bathroom. It is hot in the garage, Daddy. The kitchen door swung open with a bang, hitting the wall so hard it left a dent. Blake stood there. He looked wild. His suit was ruined, stained with sweat and dirt from the garage floor. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked from Jasmine to me, and then his eyes landed on the stack of bills. You think you are so smart, old man? He sneered, stepping into the kitchen. I heard you. I heard you poisoning her mind against me. He walked toward the table, his hands balled into fists. He was a big man, younger than me, stronger than me on paper. He saw an old retiree sitting at a table, and he thought he saw a victim. Jasmine stood up, knocking her chair over. Blake, stop. Shut up, Jasmine, he barked, not even looking at her. This is between men. You think you can humiliate me at the airport. You think you can lock me out like a dog. I am going to teach you some respect. He lunged forward. I didn't flinch. I didn't stand up. I simply reached down to the floor beside my chair and lifted up what I had been working on before I started cooking breakfast. It was my Mossberg 500 pump action shotgun. It wasn't loaded, but Blake didn't know that. I had been cleaning it, oiling the slide, polishing the wood stock. It gleamed in the morning sunlight, dark and menacing. I set it on the table, right on top of the stack of bills. The metal clanked against the wood. I picked up a rag and slowly, methodically started wiping the barrel. I didn't point it at him. I didn't need to. The presence of the steel was enough. Blake skid to a halt. His eyes went from my face to the gun and back again. The rage in his face evaporated, replaced instantly by fear. He took a stumbling step back. Whoa, he stammered, holding his hands up. Walter, are you crazy? Put that away. I looked at him calmly, wiping a smudge of oil from the receiver. I am just cleaning my property, Blake, I said. It is a dangerous world out there. You never know when a predator might break into your house. I pumped the slide. Clack, clack. The sound was unmistakable. It is the universal language of get out. Blake turned pale. He looked at Jasmine, hoping for support, but she was staring at the receipt for the cheesecake. She didn't look up. Get out of my kitchen, I said. Blake looked at the gun one last time. He swallowed hard. He turned around and walked out the back door faster than he had come in. I heard him running toward the garage. I looked at Jasmine. Eat your breakfast, I said. You are going to need the strength. We have a lot of work to do. The silence in the kitchen after Blake ran out was heavy, but it was the kind of heaviness I was used to. It was the calm before a storm. I told Jasmine to finish her eggs, but she just pushed them around the plate, staring at the shotgun I had left on the table. She looked terrified, not of me, but of the reality that was crashing down around her. She had spent 5 years living in a fantasy world where her husband was a big shot and I was just the wallet. Now the fantasy was dissolving and the real world was about to knock on the front door. And knock it did, but not with a knuckle. It started with the sound of an engine, a low rumbling growl that I felt in the floorboards before I heard it with my ears. I walked to the front window and pulled back the sheer curtain just an inch. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling at the curb. It wasn't a delivery truck, and it certainly wasn't the Uber Blake couldn't afford. It was a Cadillac Escalade, the kind that screams bad news. The engine cut off and 3 men stepped out. They were big men. The kind of men who spent too much time lifting weights and not enough time reading books. They wore suits that were too tight across the shoulders and sunglasses that cost more than my first car. I knew exactly what they were. I had seen their type hanging around the rail yards back in the day looking for desperate men who needed quick cash and didn't ask about the interest rates. So that was it. That was the trip to Texas. Blake wasn't meeting investors. He was running. He owed money to people who didn't send overdue notices in the mail. They sent messages in person. One of the men, the one in the middle who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast, adjusted his jacket. I saw the bulge of a holster near his hip. He didn't look at the house number. He walked straight up my driveway with a confidence that made my blood boil. He thought this was Blake's house. He thought he was walking up to the home of a weak man who would cower and pay up. Jasmine. I said, my voice low and steady. Go to the laundry room, lock the door. Do not come out until I tell you. Daddy, who is that? She asked, panic rising in her voice as she stood up. Go, I ordered. She ran. I heard the laundry room door click shut. I picked up my phone. I didn't dial 911 immediately. I opened the Facebook app. I tapped the button that said live. I set the phone on the windowsill, propped up against a vase so the camera was pointing directly at the front porch. Then I picked up the Mossberg. I didn't rack the slide this time. I wanted the element of surprise. The pounding started. It wasn't a knock. It was a fist hammering against my oak door. Blake, open up, the man yelled. We know you are in there. You missed your payment last week and you missed your flight yesterday. The boss is very unhappy. I walked to the door. I didn't open it. I spoke through the thick wood. You have the wrong house, son, I said. My voice was loud enough to be heard, but calm enough to be terrifying. We saw you come in here last night, the man shouted back. We have been watching the house. Open the door, Blake, or we are going to kick it in and take those dogs as a down payment. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. I swung the door open. The 3 men stepped forward, expecting to see a scared 35-year-old white guy. Instead, they found themselves staring at the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun held by a 69-year-old black man who looked like he knew how to use it. I stepped out onto the porch. The lead man stopped so fast his friends bumped into him. He raised his hands instinctively, but his face twisted into a snarl. Who the hell are you, old man? He spat. Where is Blake? My name is Walter Jefferson, I said, keeping the barrel leveled at his chest. And you are trespassing on private property. We have business with Blake Harrison, the man said, lowering his hand slightly. He owes us 50 grand. He said this house was his collateral. He showed us the deed. I laughed. It was a cold, dry laugh. He showed you a Photoshop on a laptop, son. I have lived in this house for 30 years. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mailbox. And my name is on the permit for this weapon. The man looked at the house, then back at me. He was calculating. He was trying to decide if he could rush me before I pulled the trigger. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said, reading his mind. And before you try anything stupid, you should smile. You are on camera. I pointed to the phone in the window with my chin. I am live streaming to 500 people right now. I lied. It was probably 5 people, but he didn't know that. And I have 911 on speed dial in my pocket. In the state of Georgia, we have something called the Castle Doctrine. It means if you step 1 foot across that threshold with the intent to harm, I can legally paint my foyer with your brains, and the police will shake my hand when they arrive. The man stiffened. He looked at the phone. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at my eyes. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. He saw a man who had nothing left to lose. You are protecting a rat, the man said, spitting on my porch. He owes us. If he doesn't pay, we will be back. And next time we won't knock. Not at this address you won't, I said, stepping forward. Because if I see this car on my street again, I will shoot the tires out first and ask questions later. Now get off my property. The man glared at me for a long, tense second. Then he signaled to his goons. They turned around and walked back to the SUV. They didn't run. They wanted to save face, but they walked fast. The doors slammed, the engine roared, the Escalade peeled out of the neighborhood, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. I watched them go until they turned the corner. Then I lowered the shotgun. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. I saved the video. Evidence. I locked the front door again. I walked to the kitchen and looked out the back window toward the garage. I saw a face pressed against the dusty glass of the side door. It was Blake. He had seen the whole thing. He was white as a sheet. I went to the back door and removed the chair I had wedged under the handle. I opened the door. "Get in here," I said. Blake practically crawled into the kitchen. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my shirt. "Oh my God, Walter, thank you," he babbled. "Thank you. They were going to kill me. You saved my life. I didn't know they would come here. I thought I had more time." I pulled my arm away from his grip with a look of disgust. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the chair Jasmine had vacated. He sat collapsing into the wood like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "You lied to them," I said, standing over him. "You told them this house was yours. You put my home, my legacy up as collateral for a loan shark." "I had to," Blake stammered. "I needed the money for the dogs. It was a sure thing, Walter. The puppies were going to sell for $10,000 each. I was going to pay them back next month. Next month never comes for people like you," I said. I walked to the drawer where I kept my stationery. I pulled out a legal pad and a pen. I slammed them onto the table in front of him. "Pick up the pen," I ordered. "What is this?" Blake asked, staring at the yellow paper. "You are going to write something for me," I said. "You are going to write a promissory note. You are going to acknowledge that for the last 5 years I have paid for your food, your clothes, your car, and your shelter." Blake hesitated. "Walter, we are family. You don't charge family for rent." I leaned in close, my face inches from his. I could smell the fear sweat on him. "Those men just left Blake, but they didn't go far. They are probably parked a few blocks away waiting for you to come out. If I kick you out of this house right now, how long do you think you will last?" "An hour, maybe 2. Blake swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the front door, as if he could see the Grim Reaper standing there. "Right," I said. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so bad he could barely hold it. I dictated, and he wrote. "I, Blake Harrison, hereby acknowledge a debt of $200,000 to Walter Jefferson. This sum represents unpaid rent, utilities, vehicle payments, and personal loans accrued from 2019 to present day. I agree to repay this debt in full." He finished writing. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "Walter, I can't pay this. I don't have $200,000. "I know you don't," I said, snatching the paper from him. "But now I have proof. I have proof that you aren't an investor. You are a debtor. And this piece of paper is the leash I am going to use to control you." I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. "You can stay in the house today," I said, "because I don't want blood on my porch. But you are not a guest anymore, Blake. You are an inmate, and I am the warden." I looked at the shotgun still sitting on the table. "Now get out of my sight. Go back to the garage. If I hear a single peep out of you, if you ask for a single thing, I will open that front door and invite those gentlemen back for coffee. Do you understand me?" "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I understand." He got up and walked back toward the garage door. He walked like an old man, defeated and broken. He knew his life was over. He was trapped. He couldn't leave because of the sharks outside. He couldn't stay because of the wolf inside. I watched the door close behind him. I heard the lock click. I went to the laundry room and knocked on the door. "It is safe, Jasmine," I said. "You can come out now." She opened the door, her eyes wide and red. She looked at the empty kitchen. "Where are they?" she asked. "Gone," I said. "And Blake?" I pointed to the garage. "He is where he belongs," I said. I sat back down at the table and looked at my cold breakfast. I had no appetite. I felt dirty. I had saved a man I despised because I didn't want my home to become a crime scene. But as I touched the paper in my pocket, I knew I had done something smarter. I had bought myself an insurance policy. Blake thought the debt was about money. He was wrong. The debt was about ownership. And I just bought him for the price of a sheet of paper. I picked up my coffee cup. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. The bitterness reminded me to stay sharp. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a new battlefield. And I was ready. I had the gun, I had the house, and now I had the confession. The next step was to make sure Jasmine saw the man in the garage for what he really was. Not a victim, but a liability. And liabilities have to be liquidated. For 7 days the house was quiet. It was a silence that felt heavy and thick like the air before a tornado touches down in the Georgia heat. After I forced Blake to sign that promissory note acknowledging his $200,000 debt, he changed. The arrogance evaporated. The loud demands for premium steaks and designer clothes stopped. He became a ghost in my house. He slept in the garage without complaint. He woke up early. He swept the driveway. He even offered to wash the dishes after dinner. To an outsider, it looked like repentance. It looked like a man who had hit rock bottom and was trying to climb his way back up with humility. But I knew better. I had worked with men like Blake on the railroad for 40 years. I knew the difference between a man who was sorry and a man who was plotting. A sorry man looks you in the eye. A plotting man watches your hands. And Blake was watching me constantly. He watched where I put my keys. He watched when I took my blood pressure medication. He watched me when I sat in my armchair staring out at the garden trying to find the peace I had lost. Jasmine thought it was a miracle. She sat at the kitchen table one morning sipping herbal tea and smiling at me. "See, Daddy," she said, her voice full of desperate hope. "He is trying. He really is. He scared himself with those loan sharks. Maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. Maybe we can be a family again." I didn't have the heart to tell her that a snake sheds its skin, but it never changes its venom. I just nodded and kept my guard up. I kept the shotgun locked in the safe now, but the key never left the chain around my neck. On Wednesday, the trap sprung. It started in the living room. I was looking for the remote control. I knew I had left it on the side table next to my reading glasses, but it wasn't there. I looked under the cushions. Nothing. I looked on the floor. Nothing. Blake walked in holding a basket of laundry. He stopped and looked at me with a concern that looked painted on. "What are you looking for, Walter?" he asked, his voice dripping with synthetic syrup. "The remote." I grunted, moving a stack of magazines. "I put it right here." "Oh," Walter Blake said, shaking his head sadly. "You are holding it." I looked down at my hand. It was empty. I looked back at him confused. "No, I am not." Blake laughed, a soft, condescending sound. "Not that hand, Walter. The other one. No, wait. You put it in the fridge. I saw you do it 5 minutes ago when you got the milk. Remember?" I frowned. I hadn't gone to the fridge. I hadn't touched the milk. "I didn't go to the fridge." "Blake," I said, my voice rising slightly, "stop playing games." "I am not playing games," Walter Blake said, stepping closer. "I am worried about you. You have been forgetting things a lot lately. Yesterday you left the stove on. The day before you called me by your brother's name. You remember that, don't you? My brother died 10 years ago. I had never called Blake by his name. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This was gaslighting. Pure and simple, he was trying to make me doubt my own mind. I did no such thing. I snapped. "You are lying." Blake pulled his phone out of his pocket. He held it casually at his hip, but I noticed the screen was facing me. The red dot of the voice recorder app was pulsing. "Why are you getting so aggressive, Walter?" he asked, raising his voice just enough to sound scared. "I am just trying to help. You are confusing me with the people who came to the door. You are confused, Walter. Please put the cane down. You are scaring me." I looked at my hand. I was holding my walking cane. I always held it. I needed it for my knee. But he was making it sound like a weapon. "I am not confusing anything," I roared, losing my temper. "I know exactly who you are. You are a thief and a liar. And if you don't get that phone out of my face, I will smash it." "Gotcha," Blake whispered. He tapped the screen and slid the phone into his pocket. The mask of concern vanished, replaced by a smirk that was so cold it made me shiver. "You really should control that temper, Walter," he said. "It is not good for your blood pressure, especially at your age. People might think you are a danger to yourself." He walked away whistling, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, gripping my cane until my knuckles turned white. I knew he had recorded me. I knew he had engineered the whole conversation to make me sound angry and confused. But I didn't know what he was going to do with it. I thought maybe he would show Jasmine to turn her against me. I underestimated him. He wasn't aiming for Jasmine. He was aiming for the state. 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the aggressive pounding of the loan sharks. It was a polite, authoritative double knock. I was in the kitchen polishing the silverware. Jasmine was at the grocery store. Blake was supposedly in the garage. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. I checked the camera. A woman stood there. She was middle-aged, wearing a sensible beige suit and holding a clipboard. A police officer stood behind her, looking bored but alert. My stomach dropped. I opened the door. "Mr. Walter Jefferson?" the woman asked. Her voice was professional but lacked warmth. "That is me," I said. "My name is Mrs. Gable. I am with the Georgia Department of Human Services Division of Aging Services. Adult Protective Services." I felt the blood drain from my face. A PS. The agency that steps in when elderly people are being abused or when they can no longer take care of themselves. "May we come in?" she asked. "Do I have a choice?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just stepped forward and I stepped back. The officer followed her inside and stood by the door, his hand resting near his belt. "We received a report, Mr. Jefferson," Mrs. Gable said, clicking a pen. "A very concerning report regarding your welfare and the safety of this household. A report from whom I asked, though I already knew the answer. We keep our sources confidential," she said, looking around the living room. "The report alleges that you are suffering from advanced dementia. It states that you have become increasingly violent, specifically threatening family members with firearms. It also mentions hoarding behavior and unsanitary living conditions involving animals." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He had checked every box: dementia, violence, hoarding. He took the truth about the dogs and twisted it so it looked like I was the one keeping them in filth. He took the incident with the shotgun and made me the aggressor. "This is nonsense," I said, keeping my voice calm. "My son-in-law made that report, didn't he? He is retaliating because I cut him off financially." Mrs. Gable looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. Jefferson, do you own a firearm?" "Yes," I said. "It is legal. It is locked in a safe." "Did you recently brandish that firearm at a family member during an argument about money?" "I defended my home," I said. "So you admit you pulled a gun," she said, making a note on her clipboard. "I didn't pull it. I cleaned it. There is a difference." Just then Blake walked in from the garage. He looked like the picture of a grieving saint. He walked right up to Mrs. Gable and shook her hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "I didn't want to make the call. I really didn't. But I am scared. He forgets who I am. He screams at things that aren't there. And the gun, I found him wandering the house with it at night, talking about enemies." He turned to me, looking at me with those lying eyes. "I love you, Walter. We just want you to get the help you need. You can't live here alone anymore. It is not safe." "You liar," I said, stepping toward him. "You snake." "Mr. Jefferson." "Please step back," the officer said, stepping between us. "See?" Blake cried, pointing at me. "See how aggressive he is. He snaps just like that. I have a recording. Do you want to hear it?" He pulled out his phone and played the audio from 2 days ago. My voice filled the room, distorted and angry. "I will smash it. You are a thief and a liar." Without the context of him taunting me, without the video of him holding the phone, I sounded like a man who had lost control. I sounded unhinged. Mrs. Gable listened, her expression grim. She stopped the recording. "Mr. Jefferson," she said, turning to me. "Based on the report and what I am observing, I have serious concerns about your capacity. We are not taking you into custody today, but I am opening an investigation. I am going to require a full medical evaluation, and until that is complete, I strongly recommend that you do not have access to firearms or finances." She looked at Blake. "Sir, since you are a resident here and a family member, are you willing to act as a temporary guardian if the state deems it necessary?" I felt the room spin. Guardian. That was the word. That was the goal. If Blake became my guardian, he would control my bank accounts. He would control the house. He would control me. He could put me in a home and sell everything I worked for to pay off his debts. "I am willing," Blake said, bowing his head. "It is a heavy burden, but I will do it for the family." "Over my dead body," I said. "That is exactly what we are trying to avoid, Mr. Jefferson," Mrs. Gable said, closing her file. "We will be back on Monday with a court order for a competency hearing. I suggest you cooperate. If you resist, we can have you involuntarily committed for evaluation." She handed me a card. "Have a good day, sir." They walked out. The door clicked shut. I stood in the hallway staring at the wood grain of the door. My hands were shaking not from age but from a rage so pure it felt like it could burn the house down. I turned slowly to look at Blake. He wasn't pretending anymore. The sad son-in-law act dropped the moment the lock clicked. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, and smiled. A wide, toothy, genuine smile. "You should have just let me go to Texas, Walter," he said softly. "Now you are going to go to a place much worse than Texas. And the best part is you are going to pay for it with your own money while I live here and take care of things." He laughed and walked past me, heading toward the kitchen to grab a beer from the fridge. He felt safe. He felt like he had won. He thought the law was on his side because he knew how to manipulate the system. I watched him go. I felt a cold calm settle over me. He had made a fatal mistake. He thought this was a game of checkers where you jump over pieces and claim the board. He didn't realize I was playing chess. And in chess, you don't attack the king until you have removed all his pawns. I went to my bedroom and locked the door. I didn't call a doctor. I didn't call Jasmine. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years but knew by heart. Soraya Davis, attorney at law. She answered on the second ring. "Walter," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "It has been a long time. Everything okay?" "No, Soraya," I said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I need you to dust off my file. And I need you to prepare for a war. My son-in-law just tried to commit me. I want to activate the nuclear option." I heard the smile in her voice when she replied. "I have been waiting 5 years for this call, Walter. I will be there in the morning." I hung up. Blake had the first move, but he had forgotten one thing. He was fighting a man who built railroads. I knew how to lay a trap that would derail a train. And Blake was chugging straight toward a cliff. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a freight train schedule. Blake had spent the weekend walking around the house with a mournful expression, acting like he was preparing a eulogy for my sanity. He had even called Jasmine into the kitchen twice to whisper loudly about finding a good facility for me, one with a nice garden where I wouldn't hurt anyone. He was putting on a show, but he didn't realize the curtain was about to rise on a completely different play. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I didn't put on my bathrobe. I didn't put on my slippers. I shaved close until my skin was smooth. I put on my charcoal gray Sunday suit, the one I wore to church and to funerals. I tied a Windsor knot that was tight and symmetrical. I polished my shoes until I could see the reflection of a man who was far from finished. By the time Mrs. Gable from Adult Protective Services rang the doorbell at 9 sharp, the house smelled of fresh coffee and lemon furniture polish. I opened the door before she could knock a second time. Mrs. Gable looked surprised. She was expecting a confused old man in pajamas, perhaps holding a weapon or shouting at invisible enemies. Instead, she found a man who looked like he owned the block. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Please come in. Can I offer you a cup of coffee? It is a fresh pot of Ethiopian blend." She blinked, adjusting her glasses. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. No coffee for me. We have some serious matters to discuss." She walked into the living room, followed by the same police officer from Friday. Blake was already there, sitting on the sofa, trying to look like the exhausted caregiver. He was wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a t-shirt, presumably to show how much stress he was under. He stood up when she entered, putting on his sad face. "Mrs. Gable," Blake said, his voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming back. It has been a hard weekend. He has been difficult." Mrs. Gable ignored him and turned to me. She opened her file. "Mr. Jefferson, as I mentioned, we need to assess your cognitive state. I am going to ask you a series of questions. Some might seem simple, but please answer them as best you can." I sat down in my armchair, crossing my legs and resting my hands on my knees. "Fire away," I said. "Can you tell me your full name and date of birth?" "Walter Elias Jefferson, born August 12th, 1954. "Can you tell me where we are right now?" "We are at 452 Oakwood Drive, Atlanta, Georgia. Zip code 30318. It is a humid morning, 72 degrees. Mrs. Gable scribbled something down. "Who is the current president of the United States?" I answered correctly, and then I added, "And if you check the morning news, you will see he just signed a new infrastructure bill that is going to impact steel prices, something a retired railman keeps an eye on." She stopped writing and looked up. "Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58. Shall I continue to 0, or is that sufficient?" She closed the folder slightly. That is sufficient. Mr. Jefferson, your cognitive recall seems perfect. However, mental acuity doesn't rule out behavioral instability. The report states you threatened your son-in-law with a shotgun because you believed he was a stranger. I didn't believe he was a stranger, I said calmly. I knew exactly who he was. I was cleaning my weapon because I have reason to believe there are dangerous individuals targeting this house. Not imaginary ones, Mrs. Gable. Real ones. Blake jumped in, sensing the tide turning. See? That is the paranoia. He thinks people are coming for him. There is nobody coming, Walter. It is all in your head. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the television console. Mrs. Gable, I said. I spent 40 years as a foreman. I don't work on hunches. I work on evidence. You are here to determine if I am a danger to this household, but I think you are investigating the wrong man. I picked up the remote control, the same remote Blake had tried to hide from me days earlier. I installed a comprehensive security system in this house 6 months ago, I said. It records audio and video in all common areas and the exterior, including the garage. I saw Blake's face go the color of ash. He started to stand up. Mrs. Gable. This is private, he stammered. You can't just... Sit down, Blake, the police officer said. His voice was sharp. I pressed play. The 60-inch screen flickered to life. The first clip was from 2 weeks ago. It showed Blake in the garage. He wasn't grooming the dogs. He was screaming at them. He kicked a crate so hard the dog inside yelped in terror. Stupid mutt. Blake's voice echoed through the living room. You are costing me money. Mrs. Gable gasped. She loved animals. I could tell by the way she flinched. I skipped to the next clip. It was Blake in the kitchen throwing a plate against the wall because Jasmine hadn't cooked dinner. The video showed him grabbing her arm, shaking her. You are useless, he screamed in the video. Just like your father. I skipped to the final clip. It was from Friday morning. The clip of the loan sharks on my porch. The audio was crystal clear. He owes us 50 grand. He said this house was his collateral. I paused the video on the image of the 3 thugs standing at my door. I turned to Mrs. Gable. I didn't pull my shotgun because I was confused, I said, my voice low and hard. I pulled it because 3 debt collectors from a criminal organization were threatening to break down my door. They were here because he... I pointed a finger at Blake, owes them a fortune. He stole my ticket to Texas to run away from them. He tried to have me committed so he could take control of my assets to pay them off. I looked at Blake. He was slumped on the sofa, looking small and defeated. I am not losing my mind, Mrs. Gable, I said. I am a father trying to protect his home from a man who has brought danger to my doorstep. I am scared. But I am not scared of dementia. I am scared of him. I am scared of what he will do next to get that money. Mrs. Gable stood up. Her face had changed completely. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a look of horrified realization. She looked at Blake with something close to disgust. Is this true? She asked Blake. Did you file a false report to cover up a debt issue? Blake tried to speak, but he choked. It is out of context, he squeaked. He is manipulating the footage. Mrs. Gable turned back to me. Mr. Jefferson, I owe you an apology. It is very clear that you are of sound mind. In fact, you are incredibly sharp. She opened her file again, took out the form for the competency hearing, and ripped it in half. Then she pulled out a different form. However, she continued looking at Blake. I am now opening a different case. This footage shows clear evidence of domestic abuse and elder financial exploitation. Mr. Jefferson, do you feel unsafe with this man in your home? I looked at Blake. I wanted to say yes. I wanted the police officer to drag him out right then and there. But I remembered the loan sharks. I remembered the debt note in my pocket. If he went to jail now, he would be safe from them. I needed him to sweat a little longer. I can handle him, I said, as long as the state knows the truth. But Mrs. Gable, I would appreciate it if you kept this case open, just in case he tries anything else. Absolutely, she said. I will be filing a report with the district attorney regarding the false APS claim. That is a crime, sir, she said to Blake. The officer stepped forward. Do you want to press charges for the assault we saw on the video, Mr. Jefferson? Not today, I said. My daughter needs to handle that in her own time, but I want a record of it. Mrs. Gable packed up her things. She walked to the door, then stopped and turned to Blake. You should count your blessings that this man is as patient as he is, she said. If I receive one more call, one more report, or see one more bruise on anyone in this house, I will come back with a warrant, not a clipboard. She shook my hand firmly. You take care, Mr. Jefferson. You are a strong man. I watched them leave. The door clicked shut. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a graveyard. Blake didn't move from the couch. He stared at the blank TV screen, seeing his own reflection. He knew what had just happened. He had fired his biggest weapon, the one that was supposed to bury me, and I had caught the bullet in my teeth and spit it back at him. I walked over to the TV and turned it off. I am going to change out of this suit, I said, casually loosening my tie. It is a bit formal for a Monday. You should probably clean the garage, Blake. I think I saw a spot you missed on the video. I walked up the stairs, listening to his breathing. It was fast and shallow. The breathing of a trapped animal. I went into my room, took off my jacket, and hung it up carefully. I looked in the mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't just a survivor. He was a winner. But the game wasn't over. I had humiliated him. I had exposed him. Now I had to destroy the source of his arrogance completely. I had to cut off the last thing he was holding on to, his pride. The law moves slow, but when it arrives like a freight train. Mrs. Gable had left my house on Monday morning, promising to file a report, but she did more than that. She triggered a chain reaction that was about to blow the roof off Blake's entire operation. It was Tuesday afternoon when I saw them coming. I was sitting on the front porch sipping iced tea and watching the heat waves rise off the asphalt. The neighborhood was quiet until a convoy of 3 white vans turned onto Oakwood Drive. They didn't have sirens, but they had something scarier painted on the side, the seal of the Fulton County Animal Services and Enforcement Division. Blake was in the driveway washing his precious Ford Raptor truck. He was whistling, trying to wash away the humiliation of the previous day with a garden hose and a bucket of soapy water. When he saw the vans slow down and stop in front of the house, the whistling stopped. He dropped the sponge. It hit the wet concrete with a wet splat. Officers stepped out of the vans. They weren't smiling. They wore uniforms that looked ready for a raid, and they carried catch poles and heavy-duty gloves. The lead officer, a tall woman with a face like carved granite, walked straight up to Blake. "Are you Blake Harrison?" she asked. Blake wiped his wet hands on his shorts, looking nervous. "Yes, that is me." "Is there a problem, officer? We have a warrant to inspect these premises regarding reports of an illegal breeding operation and animal cruelty," the officer said. She didn't hand him a piece of paper. She held it up for him to see and then marched past him toward the garage. Blake scrambled after her. "Wait, you can't go in there. That is private property. Those are my emotional support animals." I watched from the porch, rocking slowly in my chair. Emotional support animals. That was his latest lie. He thought if he used the right buzzwords, the law would back off. He was wrong. The officers didn't wait for his permission. They rolled up the garage door. The smell that wafted out was still there, faintly underneath the scent of bleach Blake had panic sprayed the night before. But smells weren't the problem. The infrastructure was. I stood up and walked down the driveway to witness the end of an empire. The lead officer stood in the middle of the garage looking at the stackable cages, the heat lamps, and the breeding charts tacked to the wall. She looked at the bag of cheap food in the corner. Then she looked at the 5 French bulldogs who were currently cowering under the workbench, terrified of the strangers. She turned to Blake, who was standing in the doorway wringing his hands. "Mr. Harrison, let me see your breeding license," she said. "I applied for it." Blake lied. "It is pending. The paperwork is in the mail." She checked her tablet. "We have no record of an application. Let me see your tax ID number for this business. I don't have one yet." "It is just a hobby," Blake stammered. "A hobby doesn't have 5 unspayed females and breeding schedules on the wall," the officer said. She gestured to her team. "Seize them." "No," Blake screamed, lunging forward. "You can't take them. Those dogs are worth $50,000. That is my inventory." 2 officers blocked him, their hands resting on their belts. Blake stopped breathing hard. He watched helplessly as the officers gently coaxed the dogs out from under the bench. They didn't drag them. They picked them up with care, whispering soft words to the frightened animals. They loaded them one by one into the air-conditioned crates in the vans. I watched the dogs go. I felt a pang of sadness because I would miss their little personalities, but mostly I felt relief. They were going to a shelter where they would be fed properly and adopted by families who wanted pets, not paychecks. The lead officer wasn't done. She pulled out a citation book that looked as thick as a Bible. She started writing. "You are being cited for operating a commercial kennel without a license," she said, tearing off a slip. "That is a $1,000 fine." Blake flinched. You are being cited for 5 counts of animal cruelty due to inadequate housing and sanitation based on the video evidence provided to our agency. She continued, tearing off another slip. That is $1,000 per dog, $5,000 total, she wrote again. You are being cited for failure to vaccinate and failure to register animals with the county, another $500 per dog, $2,500. She ripped the final page out and handed the stack to Blake. He took them, his hands trembling so violently the papers rattled. The total is $8,500, Mr. Harrison, she said. And you are liable for the daily boarding costs of these animals while they are in our custody pending the court hearing. If you do not pay these fines and appear in court in 30 days, a bench warrant will be issued for your arrest. Blake stared at the papers. $8,500, plus the value of the dogs he just lost. In 10 minutes, his net worth had gone from zero to negative $50,000. His get-rich-quick scheme hadn't just failed. It had bankrupted him. The officers got back in their vans. The lead officer looked at me and nodded a silent acknowledgement. I nodded back. They knew I was the one who provided the footage. They knew I was the one who opened the gate. The vans drove away, taking the noise and the chaos with them. The driveway was silent except for the sound of the water still running from the hose Blake had dropped. It flooded the driveway, washing the soap suds into the gutter just like his dreams. Blake stood there for a long time, staring at the empty garage. Then he turned around. He didn't look at me. He looked past me toward the front door where Jasmine was standing. She had come out when she heard the commotion. She was hugging herself, looking at her husband with a mixture of pity and horror. "You did this," Blake whispered. He started walking toward her. His walk wasn't the strut of a peacock anymore. It was the stomp of a wounded bear. "You let them in," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You knew they were coming. You told them where the charts were." Jasmine shook her head, backing up toward the door. "No, Blake. I didn't. I swear." He marched up the steps. I moved to intercept him, but I was too far away. He reached Jasmine before I could get there. "You useless waste of space," he screamed right in her face. "You are supposed to be my wife. You are supposed to protect me. You just stood there and watched them take my money." Jasmine was crying now. "Blake, they were hurting. The dogs were hurting. Maybe it is for the best." "For the best," Blake roared. He raised his hand. It happened in slow motion. I saw the hand go back. I saw Jasmine flinch, closing her eyes. I shouted her name, but I couldn't stop it. The sound of the slap was louder than the shotgun rack. It was a sharp, meaty crack that echoed off the brick of the house. Jasmine's head snapped to the side. She stumbled back, catching herself on the doorframe. She touched her cheek, looking at Blake with wide, shocked eyes. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had stopped, instantly replaced by a stunned silence. Blake stood there, his hands still raised, breathing heavily. For a second, he looked surprised by what he had done. Then his face hardened. "Don't look at me like that," he spat. "You made me do this. You pushed me." I reached the bottom of the steps. The rage inside me was a cold, white fire. I gripped my cane so hard the wood creaked. "Get away from her," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Blake spun around. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw that I wasn't just an old man with a checkbook. He saw the man who had survived riots and rail strikes. He saw a father who had just watched his child get hurt. "Stay out of this," Walter Blake warned, backing away. "This is between me and my wife." "She is not your wife anymore," I said, walking up the steps one by one. "She is my daughter, and you just lost your last shield." I reached Jasmine. I put my arm around her. She buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. I could feel the heat radiating from her cheek where he had struck her. "Go inside, Jasmine," I said softly. "Go upstairs. Lock the door." She didn't argue. She didn't look at Blake. She turned and walked into the house, leaving us alone on the porch. I turned to Blake. He was standing on the lawn now, looking at his hands. "You hit her," I said. "She wouldn't listen," Blake mumbled. "I lost everything, Walter. The dogs, the money, everything. I just snapped." "You didn't lose everything," I said. "You just lost your freedom." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "I am calling the police," I said. "Assault. Domestic violence. With the APS report already on file and the animal cruelty citations, you will be in jail before dinner." "No," Blake pleaded, dropping to his knees on the grass. "Please, Walter. Don't call. I can't go to jail. The loan sharks. If I go to jail, I can't pay them. They will kill me in there. Or they will find me when I get out. Please." Give me a chance. I will leave. I will go. Just don't call the cops. I looked at him kneeling in the grass, the knees of his expensive sweatpants stained green. He was pathetic. He was a bully who crumbled the moment someone hit back. I looked at the phone in my hand. Then I looked at the house. If I sent him to jail now, Jasmine would have to go through a trial. She would have to testify. She would have to relive that slap over and over again in front of a jury. She was fragile. She needed time to heal, not a court battle, and I had a better punishment in mind. Get up, I said. He looked up, hopeful. You won't call. I lowered the phone. I am giving you a choice, Blake. Option A. I call the police. You go to jail, you get a record, and you deal with whatever happens to you inside. Option B. Blake asked, scrambling to his feet. Option B. I said is eviction. Legal, formal eviction. You have 30 days to vacate this property. During those 30 days, you stay in the garage. You do not speak to Jasmine. You do not enter the main house. You work to pay off your debt to me. And at the end of 30 days, you leave. Forever. I will take it, Blake said quickly. I will take option B. Thank you, Walter. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. Save your breath. Because I am going to make the next 30 days the longest month of your life. I turned and walked into the house, locking the door behind me. I went straight to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the number for Soraya Davis. It wasn't enough to just kick him out. I needed to make sure he left with nothing. I needed to make sure that when he walked out that door, he didn't take a single dime of my daughter's future with him. I dialed the number. Soraya, I said when she answered. Bring the paperwork. We are filing for eviction. And Soraya, start drafting the divorce papers too. He hit her. I heard Soraya suck in a breath on the other end of the line. I will be there in an hour, she said, and Walter, check the trust fund clauses. We are going to bury him. I hung up. I went upstairs to comfort my daughter. The slap had been painful, but it had done something I couldn't do. It had woken her up. The love was gone. Now there was only the cleanup. And I was an expert at cleaning up messes. Soraya Davis did not have an office in a glass tower downtown where the elevators moved faster than your heartbeat. She worked out of a restored brownstone on Auburn Avenue, right in the heart of the district where history was written in the pavement. Soraya was the daughter of a preacher and the sharpest legal mind I had ever met. She had handled my wife's estate, she had set up the trust fund that nobody knew about, and now she was going to help me clean house. I sat in her office, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves that smelled of old paper and furniture polish. I watched her read through the police report, the animal control citations, and the promissory note Blake had signed. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just processed the information like a computer with a soul. You have a strong case for a restraining order, Walter Soraya said, looking over her reading glasses. He hit her. We have a witness. We have a pattern of aggression. I shook my head. A restraining order is just a piece of paper, Soraya. If I get one, he has to stay 500 feet away, but he has nowhere to go. He will just park his car down the street and stalk the house. He will make Jasmine's life a living hell from the sidewalk. I need him gone. I need him evicted. I need him to have no legal claim to ever step foot on my property again. Soraya nodded slowly. Then we do it the hard way. We file a formal dispossessory warrant. In Georgia, that is the legal term for eviction. Since he has established residency, we have to treat him like a tenant who hasn't paid rent. He hasn't paid rent in 5 years, I grunted. Exactly, she said. But now you have that promissory note. That proves the arrangement was financial, not just familial. That makes him a tenant in default. She turned to her computer and started typing. The sound of her fingers on the keys was aggressive, like hail hitting a tin roof. I am drafting a 30-day notice to vacate, she said. This is the first step. You have to serve him with this. It tells him his tenancy is terminated. If he is not out in 30 days, the sheriff comes and puts his things on the curb. She paused and looked at me. Walter, you know how these things go. He is going to fight it. He is going to drag it out. Let him try, I said. I have time, I have money, and I have the truth. She printed the document. It was a single sheet of paper, crisp and white. At the top, in bold letters, it said, Notice of Termination of Tenancy. It looked simple, but it was a loaded gun. I signed it at the bottom. The ink flowed smoothly. It felt like signing a peace treaty after a long, bloody war. Serve him today, Soraya advised, handing me the paper. And Walter, record everything. When a rat gets cornered, that is when it bites the hardest. I drove home with the notice sitting on the passenger seat. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. It matched my mood perfectly. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. The power was still on, but nobody had turned on a light. It felt like a house in mourning. I walked inside. The air was heavy. I could hear soft sobbing coming from upstairs. I walked up the steps, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the hardwood. I walked past the guest room where I slept. I walked past the bathroom. I stopped in front of the master bedroom door. This was the room my wife and I had shared for 30 years. It was a sacred space, but for the last 5 years it had been occupied by a man who treated it like a hotel and a woman who was too afraid to speak up. I pulled a roll of heavy-duty duct tape from my pocket. I tore off a long strip. The sound was loud in the quiet hallway. Rip. I held the eviction notice against the center of the door. I taped it down, top, bottom, left, right. I smoothed the tape with my thumb, making sure it wasn't coming off. The door opened slowly. Jasmine stood there. She was wearing a bathrobe, her hair messy, her left cheek swollen and purple from where Blake had slapped her. She looked at the paper on the door. She read the words. "Notice to vacate. Daddy," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "What is this? It is exactly what it says." "It is, Jasmine," I said. "It is the end of the road." She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "But 30 days. Where will he go? Where will I go?" I looked at her bruised face. I looked at the fear in her eyes. Part of me wanted to hug her. Part of me wanted to tell her it would be okay. But I knew that comfort was what got us here. I had comforted her when she dropped out of college. I had comforted her when she married a man with no job. I had comforted her every time she made a mistake, and all it did was enable her to make the next one. "You can stay here, Jasmine," I said. "If you divorce him, if you file charges against him for hitting you, if you stand up on your own 2 feet." She looked down at the floor. "I can't, Daddy. He needs me. He is at rock bottom. If I leave him now, I am kicking a man when he is down. He is down because he jumped off a cliff," I said coldly, "and he is trying to pull you down with him. Daddy, please." She reached out to touch my arm. "Give him another chance. He is sorry. He is in the garage right now crying. He promises he will change." I pulled my arm away. "I watched him hit you, Jasmine. I watched him slap my daughter in the face because he lost money. That wasn't a mistake. That was his character. And if you choose to stand by a man who hits you, then you are choosing to leave this house with him." She started to cry harder, ugly sobbing that shook her whole body. "I am sorry, Daddy. I am so sorry." "It is too late for sorry," I said. I pointed to the paper. "That notice applies to anyone living in that room who isn't on the deed. You have 30 days, Jasmine. Make your choice. The husband who hits you, or the father who loves you enough to let you hit the bottom." I turned around and started to walk away. I needed to get away from her tears before they drowned my resolve. I needed to be strong. Suddenly, the front door downstairs opened. I heard whistling. It was a cheerful, upbeat tune. I froze. Blake was supposed to be in the garage crying. I walked to the banister and looked down. Blake walked into the foyer. He wasn't crying. He wasn't in the garage. He was holding a grocery bag and eating a red apple. He looked up and saw me. He saw Jasmine crying at the top of the stairs. He saw the paper taped to the door. He didn't panic. He didn't beg. He took a bite of the apple, crunched it loudly, and smiled. "Evening, Walter," he called up, chewing with his mouth open. "Nice tape job. Very professional." I walked down the stairs slowly, gripping my cane. "You are supposed to be in the garage, Blake." "I got hungry." He shrugged. "And since I live here, I figured I would use the kitchen." He walked over to the stairs and looked up at the eviction notice. He squinted, pretending to read it from a distance. 30 days, huh?" He laughed. "That is cute, Walter. Really cute." He took another bite of the apple and looked me dead in the eye. "You really should have consulted a lawyer who knows about tenant rights in the state of Georgia before you wasted your ink," he said. "I did consult a lawyer," I said. "Soraya Davis. She knows more about the law than you know about stealing." Blake chuckled. "I am sure she is great. But she probably didn't tell you about the backlog in the Fulton County court system. See, Walter, I did some reading while I was in the garage. I have a smartphone. I have Google. He stepped onto the first step, invading my space. I am what the law calls a tenant at will. And once I contest this eviction, which I will, it goes to a hearing. Do you know how long it takes to get a hearing these days? 3 months, maybe 4. And if I request a jury trial, maybe 6. He grinned, juice from the apple running down his chin. And then there are appeals and hardships. I can claim I have nowhere to go. I can claim I am indigent. I can claim you are evicting me out of retaliation. He leaned in close. I am not going anywhere in 30 days, old man. I am going to be here for Christmas. I am going to be here for Easter. I am going to live in your house, eat your food, and sleep in your master bedroom for at least another 6 months. And there is nothing you or your fancy lawyer can do about it. It is called squatter's rights. Look it up. He pushed past me on the stairs, bumping my shoulder. He walked up to Jasmine, who was still crying. He didn't comfort her. He ripped the eviction notice off the door, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it over the banister. It landed at my feet. "Don't worry, babe," he said to Jasmine, loud enough for me to hear. "Your dad is just having a tantrum. We aren't going anywhere. Now go make me some dinner. I am starving." He walked into the bedroom and slammed the door. I stood in the foyer looking at the crumpled ball of paper. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but it wasn't rage this time. It was clarity. He was right. The law was slow. The courts were clogged. If I played by the rules of the system, he would bleed me dry for another half a year. He would stay in my house, torment my daughter, and laugh in my face every morning. I picked up the crumpled paper. I smoothed it out. He thought he had won because he knew the law. But he forgot that a house isn't just a legal entity. A house is a machine. It runs on power. It runs on water. It runs on comfort. He wanted to play squatter. He wanted to claim that he had a right to occupy the space. Fine, he could have the space. But he didn't have a right to the amenities. I looked at the thermostat on the wall. I looked at the light switch. I looked at the router blinking in the corner. "You want to stay for 6 months, Blake?" I whispered to the empty hallway. "You want to play the long game? Okay. Let us see how long you last when the game goes offline." I went to my study and opened my laptop. I didn't go to a legal website. I went to the customer service portal for Georgia Power. Then I went to the portal for the water department. I wasn't going to break the law. You can't just cut off utilities to a tenant. That is illegal constructive eviction, but you can certainly schedule major renovations that require the utilities to be shut off for safety reasons. I started typing a new email to a contractor friend of mine. Subject: urgent electrical and plumbing overhaul. Body: I need you to come tomorrow. I need the whole system stripped. We are rewiring the house. It is going to take a while, maybe a month, maybe 2. I hit send. Blake wanted a roof over his head. He was about to find out that a roof without power in the middle of a Georgia summer is just a fancy oven, and I was about to turn up the heat. I packed my suitcase with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who knows he is leaving a sinking ship. I took my time. I folded my shirts. I placed my shaving kit on top. The air conditioning in the house was currently humming a steady, cool 68 degrees, but I knew that sound was about to become a memory. Blake was downstairs, probably eating the food I bought and watching the television I paid for, thinking he had checkmated me with his knowledge of squatter rights. He thought the law was a shield he could hide behind while he drained me dry. He forgot that the law is a double-edged sword and I was holding the handle. I walked downstairs with my bag. Blake was sprawled on the living room sofa, his feet on the coffee table. He looked up and smirked when he saw the suitcase. "Going somewhere, Walter?" he asked, taking a bite of a pear. "Finally decided to give us some space. That is big of you. Don't worry about the house. I will hold down the fort." I stopped at the door. I didn't look angry. I looked at him with the pity one might feel for a bug that has just crawled into a Venus flytrap. "You do that, Blake," I said. "You hold it down. Just remember that a fort is only as strong as its supply lines." I walked out the door and into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The heat hit me instantly. It was 98 degrees with 90% humidity. The kind of heat that wraps around your throat and squeezes. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer off the asphalt. I got into my car and drove straight to the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown. I checked into a suite with marble floors and a thermostat set to a crisp, cool temperature. I ordered a club sandwich from room service. Then I picked up my phone and called Miller. Miller was a licensed contractor I had known for 20 years. We had worked the rail yards together before he started his own construction firm. He was a man who built things to code, and he knew the rules better than any lawyer. "Is the crew ready?" I asked. "We are parked around the corner." Walter Miller said, his voice gruff. "We have the permits. Emergency electrical panel replacement and total plumbing overhaul. The city approved it this morning. We are ready to tear it all out." "Do it," I said. "And Miller, be thorough. Safety is our #1 priority." At 7 the next morning, the invasion began. I wasn't there to see it, but Miller gave me the play-by-play later. 3 work trucks pulled up to the house. They didn't knock politely. They hammered on the door with the authority of men who are on the clock. Blake answered the door bleary-eyed and confused, wearing just his boxer shorts. "What is going on?" he demanded, trying to block the doorway. Miller stepped forward holding a clipboard. He was 6'4" and built like a brick wall. "Emergency maintenance," Miller said, pushing past Blake. "We have a work order from the homeowner regarding critical failures in the electrical grounding system and lead contamination in the pipes. The city has mandated an immediate shutdown of all utilities until the infrastructure is replaced." "Wait, what?" Blake stammered, chasing after him. "You can't just shut things down. I live here. I have rights." Miller stopped and turned around. "Look, buddy, I don't know who you are, but my job is to make sure this house doesn't burn down or poison the water supply. The permit is signed. The order is active. Now step aside or I will have the police remove you for interfering with a safety operation." Blake froze. He heard the word police. He remembered his probation. He remembered the loan sharks. He stepped back. The crew went to work with the efficiency of a demolition team. They didn't just flip the breakers. That would have been too easy for Blake to fix. They physically removed the main circuit breaker panel from the wall, leaving a gaping hole of exposed wires and drywall. They went out to the street and shut off the main water valve, then poured quick-drying concrete over the access cap to prevent anyone from turning it back on. They climbed the telephone pole and disconnected the coaxial cable for the internet. By 9 in the morning, the house was dead. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The ceiling fans coasted to a halt. The little green lights on the modem blinked out, and most importantly, the central air conditioning unit outside shuddered and fell silent. The silence was heavy, but the heat was heavier. Atlanta in July is not a place you want to be without air conditioning. A brick house like mine acts like a thermal battery. It soaks up the sun all day and radiates it inward. By noon, the temperature inside the house had climbed to 85 degrees. By 2 in the afternoon, it was 92. I sat in my hotel room watching the security camera feed on my laptop. The cameras were battery-operated and connected to a cellular backup, so they were the only things still working in the house. I watched the tragedy unfold in high definition. Blake and Jasmine were in the living room. They had opened the windows hoping for a breeze, but there was no breeze. There was only the thick, soupy air of the deep south rolling in, carrying the noise of the cicadas and the heat of the pavement. Blake was shirtless, sweating profusely. His skin was slick and shiny. He was pacing back and forth trying to get a signal on his phone, but the thick brick walls of the house blocked most of the cellular data, and without Wi-Fi, he was cut off from his distractions. He looked like a trapped rat running in a maze that had suddenly caught fire. Jasmine sat on the couch, fanning herself with a magazine. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity. She looked miserable. She stood up and walked to the kitchen. I saw her open the refrigerator door. She stared inside for a long time. The light didn't come on. The cold air didn't rush out. The milk was already warm. The meat in the freezer was starting to thaw, dripping blood onto the shelves. "We have no water, Blake!" Jasmine shouted, her voice echoing in the empty house. I turned the tap and nothing came out. "I can't even flush the toilet." "Drink the bottled water," Blake snapped, not looking up from his useless phone. "We only have 2 bottles left," Jasmine cried. "And it is boiling hot in here. I feel sick. I need a shower." "Take a cold shower," Blake yelled. "Oh wait, you can't. Because your crazy father cut the pipes." "He isn't crazy," Jasmine said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He is winning. He told us to leave Blake. He gave us a chance. Now we are living in an oven." "I am not leaving," Blake roared, throwing his phone onto the couch. "That is what he wants. He wants to smoke us out." "Well, I can take the heat. I am not going to let him win." I watched them suffer for 3 days. It was a brutal game of endurance. The house became unbearable. The smell of rotting food in the fridge began to permeate the downstairs. The toilets, having not been flushed, began to smell like an outhouse. The heat trapped inside the walls made sleep impossible. They lay on top of the sheets, sweating, tossing, and turning, their tempers fraying like old rope. On the fourth day, the temperature hit 100 degrees outside. Inside the house, it was 105. I was eating a cold fruit salad in my hotel room when I saw movement on the camera. It was Jasmine. She was in the bedroom dragging a suitcase out of the closet. She was moving frantically, shoving clothes into the bag without folding them. She was crying, sweat and tears mixing on her face. She zipped the bag shut and dragged it toward the door. She looked determined. She had reached her breaking point. She was willing to sleep on a park bench if it meant getting out of that kiln. She opened the bedroom door and ran right into Blake. He was standing in the hallway blocking her path. He looked deranged. His eyes were sunken from dehydration and lack of sleep. His stubble had grown into a patchy beard. He smelled, I imagined, of stale sweat and desperation. "Where do you think you are going?" he rasped, looking at the suitcase. "I am leaving, Blake," Jasmine said, her voice shaking. "I can't do this anymore. I can't breathe. I am going to pass out. I am going to a motel." "You don't have any money," Blake said, stepping forward. "I don't care," Jasmine screamed. "I will walk. I will go to a shelter. Anything is better than this. Get out of my way." She tried to push past him, but Blake grabbed her arm. His grip was tight, bruising the skin that was already tender from the heat. "You are not going anywhere," he hissed. "Let go of me," Jasmine yelled, struggling against him. "If you leave, I lose my claim," Blake shouted, shaking her. "You are the heir. You are the daughter. As long as you are in this house, I have a right to be here. If you abandon the property, he can lock me out for good. You are my ticket, Jasmine. You are my shield." "I am not your shield," Jasmine cried, striking his chest with her free hand. "I am your wife, but you don't treat me like a wife. You treat me like a hostage." Blake's face twisted. He didn't see a woman anymore. He saw a lifeline slipping through his fingers. He shoved her backward. Jasmine stumbled and fell onto the bed. Before she could get up, Blake grabbed the suitcase and threw it into the hallway. Then he grabbed the door handle. "You want to stay cool," he yelled. "Then sit still and stop moving. You are staying right here until your father cracks." He slammed the door shut. I heard Jasmine scream. No Blake opened the door. I heard the click of the lock. It was a simple privacy lock on the bedroom door, easily popped from the outside but impossible to open from the inside without a tool. Blake stood in the hallway, breathing hard. He leaned his forehead against the wood, listening to Jasmine pound on the door. "Shut up," he screamed at the wood. "Just shut up and wait. He will turn the power back on. He has to. He won't let his little princess melt." I sat in my hotel room, my blood turning to ice. I had started this war to teach them a lesson about comfort and gratitude. I had started it to drive a wedge between them. But I had underestimated the depth of Blake's depravity. He wasn't just a squatter anymore. He wasn't just a thief. He had just crossed the line from a civil dispute into a felony. He had imprisoned my daughter in her own sweatbox of a room to use her as a bargaining chip against me. I stood up, knocking my chair over. I didn't care about the eviction notice anymore. I didn't care about the 30-day timeline. I didn't care about the legal nuances of tenant rights. I grabbed my phone. I didn't call the police immediately. The police would take too long. They would knock. They would ask questions. They would treat it like a domestic dispute. I needed force. I needed immediate, overwhelming physical force. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the group chat labeled The Yard. It was a group of 5 men, big men who had spent their lives lifting steel rails and swinging sledgehammers, men who regarded me not just as a former boss, but as a brother. I typed a single message. "Code red at my house." He put hands on Jasmine. "I need the wrecking crew, now." 3 seconds later, the replies started pinging. "On my way." Grabbing the truck, 5 minutes out. I grabbed my car keys and ran out of the hotel room. Blake wanted to play hardball. He wanted to see who would crack first. He was about to find out that when you hit steel with flesh, the steel doesn't break. The flesh does. And I was bringing a whole lot of steel to his front door. The text message from Jasmine arrived at 4:18 in the afternoon. It was short, terrified, and it shattered the calm of my hotel room like a brick through a glass window. "Daddy, help me. He locked me in. He won't let me leave." I stared at the screen. My hand did not shake. My heart did not race. Instead, a cold, heavy sensation settled in my chest, the same feeling I used to get right before a derailment. This was no longer a legal dispute. This was no longer a parenting lesson. This was a hostage situation. And I was not going to solve it with a lawyer. I was going to solve it with iron. I did not call the police. The police would bring sirens. They would bring questions. They would stand on the porch and talk about domestic disputes and civil matters while my daughter suffocated in a room without air conditioning. I needed a solution that was absolute. I needed a force that understood the language of leverage and weight. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a group of numbers I hadn't used for anything serious in 5 years. We called ourselves the Iron Horsemen, though our wives just called us the Rail Squad. We were the men who had built the transit lines of Atlanta. We had laid tracks in freezing rain and blistering heat. We had lifted steel beams that weighed as much as a small car. We were old now, our joints stiff and our hair gray, but we were made of something harder than the soft men of Blake's generation. I called Big T first. His real name was Tyrone, but nobody called him that. He was 6'6" and wide as a doorframe. "Meet me at the house," I said. "Bring heavy gloves." Then I called Miller, the man who had cut the power. He was already nearby. And finally I called Sledge. He was 70 years old, older than me, but he still had hands that looked like catcher's mitts made of leather. 10 minutes later I was in the parking lot of the hotel. My car engine roared to life. I drove with a singular focus, ignoring the speed limit, my mind replaying the image of my daughter trapped in that sweltering room. When I pulled onto Oakwood Drive, the cavalry was already there. Big T was leaning against his Ford pickup, his arms crossed over a chest that looked like a barrel. Sledge was sitting on the tailgate, cracking his knuckles. Miller was standing by the curb, looking at the house with disgusted eyes. They didn't ask questions. They saw the look on my face. They knew the code. When a brother calls, you answer. And when a brother is angry, you become the hammer. We walked up the driveway in a phalanx. 4 old men moving with a synchronized heavy rhythm. The neighborhood was quiet, but I could feel the eyes of the neighbors peeking through their blinds. Let them look. They were about to see how we handled business in the old days. I reached the front door. I didn't knock. I punched in the code. The lock chirped, but the deadbolt didn't slide back. It was jammed from the inside. Blake had engaged the manual latch. "He thinks a deadbolt can stop us." Big T grunted. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. I handed him my keys. "Miller," I said. "The back door." Miller nodded and disappeared around the side of the house. Big T didn't kick the door. That was for amateurs. He leaned his shoulder into the wood, applying steady crushing pressure right near the hinge. He knew exactly where the weak point was. He pushed. The wood groaned. Then with a loud crack that sounded like a gunshot, the frame splintered and the door swung open. The heat hit us instantly. It rushed out of the house like the breath of a dragon, smelling of stale sweat, rotting garbage, and fear. It was at least 100 degrees inside. We stepped into the foyer. Blake was standing at the top of the stairs. He was shirtless, his skin slick with oil and sweat, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was holding a baseball bat. He looked like a castaway on a desert island, feral and desperate. "Get out!" he screamed, waving the bat. "You can't come in here. This is my house. I have rights. I will bash your heads in." I looked up at him. I didn't slow down. I started walking up the stairs. Sledge was right behind me. Big T took the rear. "Put the bat down, son," Sledge said calmly. "You don't have the swing for it." Blake swung the bat, hitting the banister. Wood chips flew. "Stay back. I am warning you. I will kill you." I reached the landing. I was 5 feet away from him. I could smell the sour odor of his panic. "You locked my daughter in a room, Blake," I said. "You forfeited your rights." He raised the bat to strike me. He never got the chance to bring it down. Miller had entered through the back door and come up the service stairs behind him. Before Blake could swing, Miller's arm wrapped around his throat in a sleeper hold. It wasn't tight enough to choke him out, just tight enough to immobilize him. Blake dropped the bat. It clattered down the stairs. Big T stepped forward. He didn't punch Blake. We weren't criminals. We were professionals. He simply reached out with those massive hands and grabbed Blake by the waistband of his shorts and the scruff of his neck. He lifted him. Blake was a grown man, 180 pounds, but in Big T's hands, he looked like an unruly toddler. Blake kicked and screamed, his legs flailing in the air. "Let me go. This is assault. Put me down." "We are putting you down," I said. "Outside." Big T carried him down the stairs. He didn't drag him. He carried him like a bag of cement. Sledge followed, walking into the master bedroom. I went to the guest room door. I heard Jasmine crying inside. "Jasmine," I called out. "It is Daddy." "Step back from the door." I kicked the lock. It was a cheap interior mechanism. It gave way instantly. The room was an oven. Jasmine was sitting on the floor in the corner, her face red and flushed, soaked in sweat. She looked up at me, her eyes dazed. She was dehydrated. "Daddy," she whispered. I picked her up. She felt light, too light. "It is over, baby girl," I said. "I have got you." I carried her out of the room. As I walked down the hall, I saw Sledge and Miller working with efficient speed. They weren't packing suitcases. They were grabbing armfuls of Blake's clothes, his shoes, his electronics, and tossing them over the banister into the foyer below. We walked out the front door. Big T was walking down the driveway. When he reached the sidewalk, the public property line, he stopped. He swung Blake once, gaining momentum, and then tossed him. Blake landed on the grass strip between the sidewalk and the road. He rolled, covered in dirt and grass clippings. "Stay there," Big T said, pointing a finger the size of a sausage. Blake scrambled backward, crab-walking on the grass, terrified. Then came the rain of clothes. Miller and Sledge walked out the front door carrying piles of suits, dress shirts, and those ridiculous loafers. They didn't fold them. They threw them onto the lawn next to Blake, a pile of expensive fabric landing in the dirt. I walked past them, carrying Jasmine to my car. I put her in the passenger seat and turned the air conditioning on full blast. I handed her a bottle of cold water from my cooler. "Drink," I said, slowly. I closed the car door and turned back to the lawn. Blake was standing up now. He was hysterical. He was wearing nothing but his gym shorts. He looked at the pile of his belongings, then at the four of us standing on the porch like a wall of granite. "You are dead," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You are all dead. I am calling the police. You broke into my house. You assaulted me. This is kidnapping. This is breaking and entering." He fumbled in the pile of clothes until he found his phone. He held it up with shaking hands. "I am dialing 911 right now," he yelled. "Do you hear me, Walter? I am sending you to prison." I walked down the driveway until I was 10 feet away from him. I leaned on my cane. "Go ahead," I said. "Call them." Blake froze, his thumb hovering over the screen. He expected me to beg. He expected me to be afraid of the law. "Tell them you locked a woman in a room without water in 100-degree heat," I said. "Tell them you held her against her will. That is a felony, Blake. It is called false imprisonment. And tell them that her father and his friends had to break down the door to save her life because she was passing out from heat stroke." I pointed at the house. "The police will come, Blake, and they will see a rescue operation. They will see a father protecting his child. And then they will see you. The man who hit his wife. The man who starved dogs. The man who owes money to criminals." I took a step closer. "Who do you think they are going to arrest, son?" Blake lowered the phone. He looked at the house. He looked at the pile of clothes. He looked at the four of us. He realized he had no leverage. He had no hostage. He had no home. But his ego was too big to let him stay silent. "You can't leave me here," he shouted. "I have nowhere to go. I have no money. You can't just throw me on the street like trash." "You are not trash, Blake," I said coldly. "Trash gets picked up on Tuesdays. You are on your own." I turned my back on him. Big T, Sledge, and Miller turned with me. We walked back toward the house. Behind us, Blake started to scream. It was a wordless, primal scream of a man who had been stripped of everything he thought he was entitled to. He screamed at the sky. He screamed at the neighbors who were now standing on their porches watching the show. I walked up the steps and into the cool shade of the porch. I didn't look back. I had reclaimed my territory. I had saved my blood. And the parasite had been excised. I got into the car where Jasmine was drinking the watercolor returning to her cheeks. She looked out the window at Blake, who was now frantically trying to gather his suits from the dirt. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked softly. I put the car in reverse. "That is not our problem anymore, Jasmine." I backed out of the driveway, leaving Blake Harrison screaming on the curb, a king of nothing ruling over a kingdom of dirt and laundry. The rail squad stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching him. They would stay there until I got back. The fortress was secure, and the war was finally truly won. The Fulton County Superior Court smelled of floor wax and old wood, a smell that usually made people nervous. But to me it smelled like the end of a long, dark tunnel. I sat at the defendant's table next to Soraya Davis. I was wearing my charcoal suit, the same one I had worn when I stared down the social worker, but today I wore a tie that had been a gift from my late wife. It was a deep maroon silk, her favorite color. I wore it because she was the one who was really going to be testifying today, even though she had been gone for 5 years. Blake sat at the plaintiff's table across the aisle. He had managed to find a suit somewhere, probably from a thrift store or a sympathetic friend, but it didn't fit him right. The sleeves were too short, exposing his wrists, and the collar gaped at his neck. He looked nervous, his leg bouncing up and down under the table, but there was still a glint of arrogance in his eyes. He had convinced himself that the law was a math equation, and that he was entitled to half of the answer. Beside him sat a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he had not slept in 3 days. He was shuffling papers frantically, trying to make sense of the mess Blake had dumped in his lap. Jasmine sat in the gallery behind me. She was wearing dark sunglasses to hide the bruising on her cheek, which had faded to a sickly yellow, but was still visible. She sat with her head bowed, hands clasped in her lap. She wasn't there to support Blake. She was there as a witness to the demolition. The bailiff called out, "All rise." Judge Harrington entered. He was a stern man with gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie a human being could tell. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked over his reading glasses at the courtroom. Civil case number 492 Harrison versus Jefferson regarding divorce asset division and claims of constructive eviction. Blake's lawyer stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a shaky hand. "Your Honor, we are here today to seek an equitable division of marital assets. My client, Mr. Blake Harrison, has been married to Jasmine Jefferson for 5 years. During that time, they resided in the marital home at 452 Oakwood Drive. Mr. Harrison contributed significant sweat equity to the property, specifically the renovation of the detached garage into a high-value animal breeding facility. Furthermore, under Georgia equitable distribution laws, the increase in the value of the home during the marriage is subject to division. We are asking for 50% of the current home value or a cash buy out of $300,000 plus alimony for spousal support, as Mr. Harrison is currently unemployed due to the defendant's illegal eviction actions." I listened to the words: sweat equity, high-value facility, illegal eviction. Every word was a lie wrapped in legal jargon. Blake sat up straighter, nodding along. He really believed it. He believed that because he had lived in my house and breathed my air, he owned half the bricks. Judge Harrington looked at the lawyer, then at Blake. "Mr. Harrison," the judge asked, "you claim you improved the property. Do you have receipts for materials? Do you have permits for this renovation?" "Well, no, Your Honor," Blake said, standing up. "I did the work myself. I built the cages. I installed the climate control. That adds value." The judge looked down at his file. "I have a report here from Animal Control stating that the facility was an illegal kennel with hazardous conditions resulting in $8,000 in fines. That doesn't sound like an improvement, Mr. Harrison. That sounds like a liability." Blake turned red. "That was a misunderstanding." "Your Honor, the point is, I lived there. It was my home. My wife and I were building a life. That house is the only asset we have." The judge turned to Soraya. "Ms. Davis, your response." Soraya stood up. She didn't shuffle papers. She picked up a single blue binder. She walked to the podium with the grace of a panther stalking a deer. "Your Honor," Soraya said, her voice clear and resonant. "The plaintiff's entire argument rests on the assumption that the property at 452 Oakwood Drive is a marital asset. It rests on the assumption that Mr. Walter Jefferson owns the home, and that his daughter Jasmine has a current claim to it." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. "However, both assumptions are factually incorrect." She handed the blue binder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Exhibit A." Soraya continued. "The deed to the property. If you look at the transfer date, you will see that 20 years ago, long before Mr. Harrison ever met Jasmine, the title was transferred out of Walter Jefferson's name." Blake frowned. He leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something. His lawyer looked confused. Judge Harrington flipped open the binder. "Who owns the property, Ms. Davis?" "The Sarah Jefferson Living Trust," Soraya said. My heart swelled when she said the name. "Sarah, my wife. The woman who saw things clearly even when I was blinded by love for my daughter," Soraya continued. "Mrs. Sarah Jefferson passed away 5 years ago. But 3 months before she died, she came to my office. She was concerned about her daughter's judgment in partners. She was concerned that Jasmine's kind heart would make her vulnerable to predators. So she created an irrevocable trust." Soraya turned to look directly at Blake. "The house, the savings accounts, and the investment portfolio are all assets of the trust. Walter Jefferson is not the owner. He is merely the trustee. He manages the assets. He does not legally own them in a way that can be divided in a divorce case involving his daughter. Blake's lawyer stood up. Objection. Even if it is a trust, if the daughter is the beneficiary, her interest can be considered. Soraya smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. I am glad you brought that up, Soraya said. Please turn to page 15 of the trust document, Your Honor. Clause 4, subsection B, the conditional inheritance clause. I watched the judge turn the pages. I knew exactly what it said. I had been there when Sarah wrote it. She sat in her hospital bed, weak but fierce, and said, Walter, that boy Blake is no good. I don't want him taking what we built. Soraya recited the clause from memory. The assets of the trust are for the sole benefit of Jasmine Jefferson, provided she is not under duress or in a marriage deemed detrimental to the estate. Furthermore, no spouse of the beneficiary shall have any claim, title, or interest in the trust assets unless said spouse has been approved in writing by the trustee after a period of 10 years of marriage. 10 years, Blake blurted out. That is ridiculous. Wait, there is more, Soraya said, raising a finger. Clause 4, subsection C, the disrespect and harm clause. She looked at the judge. This is the nail in the coffin, Your Honor. The trust stipulates that if any potential beneficiary or their spouse engages in abuse, financial exploitation, or acts of gross disrespect toward the trustee, who is Mr. Walter Jefferson, they are immediately permanently disinherited and barred from residing on any trust property. Soraya pointed to the stack of evidence on her table. We have submitted police reports of domestic violence against Jasmine Jefferson. We have submitted video evidence of Mr. Harrison attempting to commit the trustee, Mr. Jefferson, to a mental institution based on false claims. We have a signed promissory note where Mr. Harrison admits to owing the trustee $200,000. Soraya leaned forward on the podium. Mr. Harrison hasn't just failed to wait 10 years. He has violated the core protective clauses of the trust established by the late Mrs. Jefferson. By hitting his wife, he broke the abuse clause. By trying to lock up Mr. Jefferson, he broke the disrespect clause. By law, under the terms of this specific trust, Blake Harrison is entitled to absolutely nothing. Not the house, not the money, not even the shirt on his back if it was bought with trust funds. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Judge Harrington read the document carefully. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Blake, who was now pale and sweating, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mr. Harrison, the judge said, Did you sign a prenuptial agreement? No, Blake whispered. Did you ever inquire about the ownership status of the house before you moved in? No, Blake said, his voice cracking. You assumed wrong, the judge snapped. Judge Harrington looked at Blake's lawyer. Counselor, your client is suing for half of a property he has no legal claim to. The trust is ironclad. It was created years before the marriage. It is not marital property. And even if there was a gray area, your client's behavior has triggered the exclusion clauses perfectly. The judge picked up his gavel. I am dismissing the plaintiff's claim for asset division with prejudice. There will be no buyout. There will be no alimony. Wait! Blake stood up, knocking his chair back. But I improved the garage. I spent time. Sit down, the judge roared. You created a hazard that resulted in criminal citations. That is not an improvement. That is destruction of property. The judge turned to me. Mr. Jefferson, regarding the counterclaim for the $200,000 debt. Yes, Your Honor, Soraya said. We are asking for a judgment against Mr. Harrison for the full amount plus legal fees. Granted, the judge said. Judgment is entered in favor of the defendant in the amount of $200,000. Mr. Harrison, you will have your wages garnished until this debt is paid. I don't have a job, Blake screamed. I have nothing. Then you better find one, the judge said coldly, because this debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy due to the fraudulent nature of how it was accrued. Judge Harrington looked at the eviction paperwork. And finally, regarding the residency. Since Mr. Harrison has no legal claim to the trust property and has violated the terms of occupancy, the 30-day notice is valid. In fact, given the domestic violence report, I am converting this into an immediate order of protection and removal. The judge signed a paper with a flourish. Mr. Harrison, you have 24 hours to remove any remaining personal effects from the property. You are to be accompanied by a sheriff's deputy. After that, you are barred from coming within 500 feet of 452 Oakwood Drive or Mr. Walter Jefferson. Bang! The gavel hit the wood block. The sound echoed like a gunshot ending the war. I let out a breath that I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you, Sarah." Blake stood frozen at his table. He looked at his lawyer, who was already packing his briefcase, eager to get away from the disaster. He looked at the judge, who was already reading the next file. Then slowly he turned to look at the gallery. He looked at Jasmine. "Jasmine," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "Baby, you can't let them do this. We are a team. Tell them I can stay." Jasmine stood up. She took off her sunglasses, revealing the healing bruise on her cheek in the harsh courtroom light. She looked at Blake, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. She didn't see a husband. She saw a mistake. She didn't say a word. She just shook her head slowly, turned around and walked out of the courtroom. I stood up and shook Soraya's hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "Good job, Walter," she said. "Sarah would be proud." I walked past Blake on my way out. He was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, weeping. Not tears of remorse. Tears of a man who realized he had gambled everything on a lie and lost. I stopped for a second. "Blake," I said. He looked up, his eyes red and hateful. "You should have just gone to Texas," I said. "It would have been cheaper." I walked out into the hallway where Jasmine was waiting. She looked tired, broken, but free. I put my arm around her shoulder. "Let's go home," I said. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright Atlanta sun. The air was hot, but for the first time in weeks, it felt clean. We had lost the tickets. We had lost the dogs. We had lost 5 years to a lie. But we had kept the house. And more importantly, we had kept our dignity. My wife's trust had saved us not just with money, but with the wisdom she left behind. She knew that some people build and some people destroy, and she made sure that the builders always held the keys. The city of Atlanta has a way of swallowing people whole if they don't know how to swim, and Blake Harrison was drowning. I didn't have to guess what happened to him because in a town this size, bad news travels faster than a morning commuter train. 2 weeks after the judge banged that gavel, I stopped by a commercial kennel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the kind of place where they breed show dogs. It was a boarding facility for aggressive breeds, the kind of place that smells of wet fur and bleach and fear. I wasn't there to board a dog. I was there because I knew the owner, a man named Marcus, who used to work security at the rail yard. Marcus took me to the back where the cleaning crew was hosing down the concrete runs. And there he was, Blake. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit anymore. He was wearing a gray jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big and rubber boots that came up to his knees. He was scrubbing a concrete floor with a stiff bristle brush, pushing a wave of brown water toward the drain. He looked 20 years older. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and unshaven. He wasn't the arrogant entrepreneur who tore up my ticket. He was a man working off a debt that would take him a lifetime to clear. Marcus told me the arrangement. The loan sharks had found Blake living in his car the day after the eviction. They didn't break his legs because a man with broken legs can't work. Instead, they brokered a deal. They took his car, they took his watch, and then they put him to work. Every dollar he earned scrubbing filth went straight to the interest on his loan. He lived in a motel room that cost $30 a night, and he ate ramen noodles. I watched him for a minute from behind the chain-link fence. He stopped scrubbing to wipe sweat from his forehead with a dirty gloved hand. He looked up, and for a split second our eyes met. He didn't sneer, he didn't shout. He just looked down at the concrete and started scrubbing again. He had finally learned the lesson I tried to teach him at the airport. You are not above the work. You are not above the dirt. And if you treat living things like inventory, eventually you end up cleaning up their mess. I didn't feel happy seeing him like that. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt the balance of the universe correcting itself. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was worth. Leaving Blake to his fate, I drove to the other side of town to a small strip mall near the university. I parked my car and put on a baseball cap, pulling the brim low. I walked into the grocery store, not the high-end market Jasmine used to shop at, but a budget store where families counted coupons and checked unit prices. I walked down aisle 4 pretending to look at canned soup, but my eyes were on the checkout counter. Jasmine was scanning items. She was wearing a red vest over a white polo shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No expensive extensions, no professional blowout. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands, which used to be manicured, were dry and short-nailed. She scanned a bag of rice, then a carton of milk. The customer, a young mother with a crying baby, was fumbling for change. "It is okay," Jasmine said softly, her voice patient. "Take your time." She waited. She smiled. It wasn't a fake smile for a gala. It was a real, tired, human smile. I watched my daughter work. She was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. Soraya had told me the rent was $800 a month. Jasmine paid it herself. She took the bus to work because she had sold her designer handbags to buy a used Honda Civic that broke down a week later. She hadn't asked me for a dime. She hadn't called to beg for her old room back. For the first time in 5 years, I saw the woman her mother raised. She was struggling, yes, her feet probably hurt. She probably worried about the electric bill every night. But she was free. She wasn't walking on eggshells around a man who despised her. She wasn't lying to cover up his debts. She was earning her keep. I walked up to the register. She didn't look up. Immediately, she was focused on the screen. "Did you find everything okay, sir?" she asked automatically. I placed a single chocolate bar on the belt. It was her favorite kind, the one with almonds she used to sneak when she was a little girl. "I found everything I needed," I said. She froze. She looked up. Her eyes widened and filled with tears. "Daddy," she whispered, "I didn't offer to pay her rent. I didn't offer to move her back into the mansion. That would rob her of this moment." "You are doing a good job, Jasmine," I said, pointing to her name tag. "Keep going." She wiped her eyes and nodded. She scanned the chocolate bar. "That will be $1.50, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I handed her a 20. "Keep the change," I said. "Buy yourself some lunch." I walked out of the store before she could say anything else. I sat in my car and watched her through the window. She was crying, but she was standing tall. She was rebuilding her life brick by brick, and this time the foundation was solid because she was laying it herself. 3 days later, I stood in the middle of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It was the same terminal where Blake had torn my ticket a month ago. The noise was the same, the crowds were the same, but everything else had changed. I wasn't rushing, I wasn't being scolded, and I wasn't holding a ticket paid for with a supplementary card. I walked up to the Delta counter. This time I didn't go to the help desk. I went to the priority check-in lane. The agent smiled at me. "Good morning, Mr. Jefferson," she said. "Flying to Houston today." "No, ma'am," I said, handing her my passport. "Houston was for business. Today is for pleasure. I am going to Paris." "Paris." She smiled, typing on her keyboard. "That sounds wonderful. Seat 1A is ready for you." I took the boarding pass. It was thick cardstock, printed with the words, "First Class." I held it in my hand, feeling the texture. Nobody was going to tear this one up. I walked through security without a hassle. I took the train to the international terminal. I went into the lounge and ordered a glass of champagne. I sat by the window watching the massive jets taxiing on the runway. I thought about the empty house on Oakwood Drive. It was quiet now. The dogs were gone, adopted by families who loved them. The garage was cleaned out. The master bedroom was empty of Blake's presence. It was just me and the memories of Sarah. I raised my glass to the empty seat across from me. "We did it, Sarah," I whispered. "The weeds are pulled. The garden is safe." I took a sip of the cold bubbles. I thought about Blake scrubbing floors. I thought about Jasmine scanning groceries. I thought about the rail squad enjoying the bonus I had sent them. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't Walter the provider, or Walter the father, or Walter the wallet. I was just Walter. A man who had worked hard, who had saved his money, and who had finally learned that the only people who deserve a seat at your table are the ones who bring something other than an appetite. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jasmine. "Thank you for the chocolate, Daddy. I love you." I smiled. I typed back. "I am proud of you. I am going away for a while. Watch the house. The code is your birthday." I turned off my phone. The gate agent called for boarding. I stood up, picked up my leather bag, and walked down the jet bridge. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me but lessons learned. Ahead of me was the world, and I had a front row seat. I am Walter Jefferson. I am a retired railman, and nobody tears up my ticket ever again. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you think Blake got what he deserved. Until next time, remember to keep your head up and your circle small. I learned that being a provider does not mean being a doormat. For years, I thought I was protecting my family by paying for everything, but I was actually crippling them. I was trading my dignity for their comfort, and that is a trade that always leaves you bankrupt. Real love isn't about shielding people from the consequences of their actions. It is about letting them fall so they can learn how to stand up. You cannot force someone to respect you, but you can refuse to be disrespected. Peace is expensive, but it is worth every penny. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to cut off a toxic family member? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourself.